all set? Good evening. I'd like to call the Monday, August 13th Eden Prairie Planning Commission meeting to order. Would everybody stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. All right, Commissioners, the first thing on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any comments about it? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve the agenda.
Motion made by Kirk.
Second.
Second by Villarreal. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next on the agenda is the approval of our minutes from the Monday, July 23rd Planning Commission meeting. I believe everybody got a copy of that. Does anybody have any comments or clarifications on the minutes from July 23rd? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the Planning Commission minutes dated July 23rd, 2018.
Second?
Second.
Okay, I had a motion by Villarreal, second by Freiberg. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I don't believe we have any informational meetings this evening or public meetings, but we do have a number of public hearings. First public hearing we have is for Abra Auto Body and Glass at 13045, 13075, 13105 Pioneer Trail. It's a request for guide plan change from community commercial to industrial on 2.98 acres, a zoning district change from CCOM to I2 on 2.98 acres, site plan review on 2.98 acres, and a preliminary plat of 3 lots into 1 lot on 2.98 acres. For public hearings, I'd like to have staff do a staff report first. Commissioners get a chance to ask staff some questions after that, and then we'll ask the applicant to come up if they would like to give a brief presentation. We may have some questions for you, and then we'll open it up for the public to approach the podium with their own public comments if anyone would like to do that. So with that, Julie, can I have the staff report on Abra Auto Body and Glass, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. An informational meeting was held on this item at your July 23rd meeting, so there was a brief introduction of that item on that evening. As stated, it is a request for comp plan guide amendment, as well as rezoning, as well as a site plan and preliminary plat. The applicant is proposing the construction of approximately 18,000 square foot auto Abra building. The site and the building materials, site layout do conform with all of the city's requirements. There are not any waivers that are being requested. There were a few questions that were raised at the meeting a couple of weeks ago where we discussed, and I'll just go through those briefly. One of the issues was related to the building elevations, and at that time the applicant went through the building elevations and building materials for the commission, and a copy of those plans were also provided as a part of your packet. Secondarily, there was also conversation about concern of potential viewing of rooftop mechanical equipment upon construction and occupation of the site. And the applicant has confirmed that they are working towards that installation being done more into the middle of the building so that it would not be seen from the sidewalk. However, standard language in the city's development agreement does allow the city the opportunity to require any screening to be retrofitted into the site if it's determined that those HVAC units are visible from the site. Third question related to the allowable building height on the airport commercial property to the south, and the maximum building height on the airport property is 30 feet in that zoning district. And then lastly, there was a question about the irrigation system and rain sensors, and the applicant has confirmed that any irrigation system would include rain sensors. So I think that hits on all of the questions that were raised at that meeting. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Staff is recommending approval of the comp plan, the rezoning, the site plan, and the preliminary plat to combine those 3 lots into 1 lot.
Thank you very much. Before we go to the applicant, I do have a couple questions, and maybe other commissioners do also. Has the site plan changed at all? The new site plan that I received in my packet doesn't show that secondary curb cut off of Pioneer Trail, which was, at the last meeting, as far as I know, identified as fire department access. It appears now that that's been closed off, and it's a dead-end loop on that north side of the building. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there have not been any changes to the plans. In fact, the plans that you received on the 23rd of July are the same plans that are under consideration this evening. There are a few changes to the plans that are being recommended by staff, those being improvements to the landscape plan that we talked about at the last meeting about adding some landscaping around the fence and within one of the islands that was not included, and those changes need to be made prior to city council review, consistent with staff's recommendation.
Okay, so apparently we'll ignore the 11 by 17 colored attachment that showed the fence around the property with that change in the site plan configuration.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. The second quick question is, was that issue resolved on the access to the MAC property to the south? Would you remind us why this property is encumbered by the duty to provide MAC access when there's a curb cut already off Pioneer Trail?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, and there is a curb cut there. However, when this property was originally reviewed for development as part of the Cal Point property, or project rather, there was discussion about how access could be provided to the MAC property to the south if and when that develops. And rather than having multiple curb cuts in that location, a shared access is the preferred alternative. So a condition of approval would be a cross-access easement agreement in order to provide access off a singular curb cut. And the applicant in this case will be working to revise the plans. He's shown the connection from the Abra site to the MAC site, but he needs to show some additional detail with turning radii, and that will be forthcoming prior to City Council.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions of staff? Is the applicant present? Would you like to give a short presentation? Please approach the podium and let us know what your name is and the spelling of your last name and address, please.
Paul Tucci, T-U-C-C-I, Apadan, 400 Water Street, Excelsior, Minnesota, 55331. I will pick up on the chair's comment about a brief presentation here.
Thank you.
I will try to answer some questions that came up last time. I'll go through this quick. This is, so you see it, this is the prototypical elevation. I want to make sure I say that to you. This is not what we're going to build here. This is where we started from, and in working with staff, this is the elevation that we are at. Vastly different to meet the guidelines. As Julie said, we are not asking for waivers. In your packet, you can see the material types in the box up top. This is the site plan, and there is the access, the secondary access going out to Pioneer. That will be more of a fire access, and it won't be the main customer access. And you can see the dash line for the connection to the MAC property. We are fine with that. We will provide an access area, and we'll negotiate the easement when they're ready to build on it. It's kind of senseless until we know what's going there to negotiate that now, but it will be in place. Landscape plan, as Julie said, we are working with staff. One of the things that came up was to move some material to the outside of the fences in areas, and I don't know if there's a pointer on here. I should have brought mine, but there's some noticeable areas where we're going to try and do some native grasses to give some more screening to that fence. So it's not just the fence, there'll be some bounce in it with landscaping. You'll see some different things. We're working on that. That plan set will be in tomorrow for staff to review prior to the council meeting should we get approved. Just real quickly, this is the inside. We did talk about what happens inside. I just wanted to make sure everyone sees this. You can see the front, the left-hand side of this is the office area. Then at the right-hand bottom of the picture is the paint booths, and then the service bay area, or the service areas. Those are not all roll-up door bays, as we talked about. One door in the back. There are 3 doors on the bottom of the picture here that you can see. Just want to, again, we had the material boards. I'm not quite sure where
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we had them available at the last meeting.
Yes.
We remember them. Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay, so these are just the materials again. Right-hand side is the fence. We wanted to make sure we showed that. I can go through any of these that you want. I do want to answer a couple of questions or comments just so we're all clear. As Julie said, we do believe when we set the units on the roof, we will not be visible from the adjoining walkway. But as Julie also said, we've done other deals in Eden Prairie. There is a statement in the development agreement. There's a provision for staff to look, and if it isn't complying, to make us come back and screen. We understand, we know we'll have to meet that requirement. The sustainability, this is in our overview, and we thought we'd put it here just so you could see it. Just a number of things that are happening inside the building with LED lights. Inside the parking lot, lights will be LED, they'll be shielded. We do have rain sensors. There's heaters over the doors, automatic openers and closers, so we're not, as my dad used to say, we're not heating the outside. We're going to try to make sure we do that. On the facilities operations, I think we went through that, but there were a lot of questions last time we were here about the regulated material handling inside, and I wanted to just let everybody know that there was a question about spills from the cars. There are spill kits there. They have a 30-gallon drum that if somebody's leaking oil, they put the solvents down, they absorb it, they put it in there, and then it's handled by Safety Clean as their national contractor to handle all spill kit cleanups and all the paint disposal. So they do have that. I kind of covered both of them there that were asked last time. Again, the employment stuff, I don't know if we need to cover it again, but I do have it if you want, and sales impact. So I guess with that, I would open myself up to any questions you may have, and we are excited to try and get going.
Thank you, Mr. Stucci. Commissioners, do you have any questions? The applicant this time? No? Thank you. You may be seated. This is a public hearing. Are any members of the public wishing to speak to this project? If so, please step forward. Seeing none. Okay. Thank you. Commissioners, thoughts, comments? Personally, I think this will be a good addition to our city. I think they've done a good job to respond to questions. And I think we're in pretty good shape here.
Yeah, I have no questions, and I'm supportive of the project.
Okay,
I agree. I think what they did with the architecture looks really nice as well.
good, good.
I go along with it also.
Okay. Anybody want to make a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, we had a motion by Villarreal, second by Medi to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed. Any more comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Everyone's quiet tonight. I'll move to recommend approval of the Abra Auto Body and Glass Project based on staff recommendations and information contained in the staff report dated August 9th, 2018, and plan stamp dated July 10th, 2018.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion from Villarreal and a second from Kirk. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations. Motion's passed.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Good luck on your project. The second public hearing this evening is a variance for a project located at 6810 Shady Oak Road. There's a request for to allow parking setback of 21 feet from the street. City code requires 50 feet front yard setback. And again, if I could ask staff for a short staff report, and then we'll ask the applicant to come up and make a presentation if they wish. There you are. Who moved my cheese? Okay, thank you. I didn't mean to infer that you were cheese.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as stated, this is a request for a variance to a parking setback along Shady Oak Road. If you'll recall, there was a similar yet different request probably about 2 months ago in front of the Planning Commission, and the applicant has gone back to work and is back before you with a revised drawing. If I can have the overhead, I'm going to borrow the applicant's materials, if they don't mind, in order to share with the commission. As you'll recall, a couple of months ago, the variance request was providing only a 10-foot setback along that Shady Oak Road right-of-way, and also providing, if I recall correctly, 24 parking stalls. The revision provides parallel parking in order to provide an additional setback. A variance is still required because the 50-foot front yard setback is what's required by code, and the building is currently right at that 50 feet now. So the variance request, as it's presented this evening, provides a setback of ranging from 21 to 26 feet. Because the roadway kind of curves, it does not remain static. There is a little give there, but it would provide approximately 21 to 26 feet of setback and provide 14 parking stalls. So not quite as many parking stalls as originally requested, but certainly enough to meet the needs based on the concerns that the property owner has about leasing the building and not having any parking in the front of the building. So staff has reviewed the application. Staff is recommending approval of the variance as it meets the three-part test. There are a few conditions that are proposed as a part of the variance with regard to landscaping plan and the like, in order to make sure that there's enough room for that landscaping to be, one, outside that easement, and two, outside of that area that the city anticipates additional right-of-way needing to be acquired in order to improve Shady Oak Road at some point. We want to make sure that landscaping's outside of that area and doesn't get disturbed if and when that project happens. So with that, as I said, staff's recommending approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Commissioners, any questions of staff before we ask the applicant to come up? Okay, is the applicant here? Would you like to make a short presentation? Good evening.
Just a couple comments. I'm Matt Van Sloten with CSM. We're at 500 South Washington, Minneapolis. We appreciate your input at our last meeting. We appreciate the staff working with us to kind of come up with the solution that we think works here. And I'll just add maybe 2 points that weren't in the staff report. I think at the last meeting we were asked about kind of typical parking needs for a building like this. It's got about 20,000 feet of office and 50,000 feet of warehouse, roughly, a little less than that. But if you figured 5 stalls per 1,000 for the office, that's 100, and 1 per 1,000 for the warehouse, that's another 50. So it's 150 stalls is what you would normally expect for a building like this. It currently has 130, so these 14 stalls will get us up to 144, not quite to the 150, but for us, it's not only added parking, it's the ability to access the front of it and enter the entryways there. So we think this is a good solution. And I would just add to, under the staff report regarding a reasonable use of the property, you know, one of the key things for us is there's second floor office in this building, almost 10,000 feet of second floor office. So this really allows that office area to have the most value of the, you know, otherwise it's really designed like a pure warehouse building, and that office area is not as well used without this parking in front. So those are my only comments I would add. We appreciate it. I'm here, and our civil engineer and architect are here as well if you have any questions for us.
Great. Maybe stick up at the podium for just a moment. Are you okay with the conditions that are in the staff report?
Oh, yes, I meant to mention that. I think that's no problem at all. We can meet those conditions.
Great, thank you. And last time you teased us a little bit with a nice architectural rendering, and that's not a part of this proposal, I understand. Is that something that's still in the cards?
It's still part of what we're, you know, I think part of what was pointed out at the last meeting was that we didn't really have approval to do what we were showing. It was a concept that we're working on. We're continuing to refine it. And if that would be a separate approval to actually change the plan, but we would like, we think that this parking area would put us in a better position to potentially improve the front of that building.
Great. Commissioners, any more questions? Mr. Van Sloten?
I'd just like to say, I remember when you presented this a couple months ago on it, and I'm the one that proposed that there be a compromise between the city and yourself. I want to commend both of you as far as, because I left that meeting feeling there was going to be a compromise. It seemed like you both were willing, both sides, and I think this is going to work out very well. Thank you.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Again, this is a public hearing. Are there any members of the audience that would like to approach the podium and speak to the project at this time? Seeing none. Okay. Back here, commissioners, any comments? Commissioner Villarreal.
I apologize. I probably should have asked this when Julie was up here. First one, so I was not here at the first meeting, so apologize if these are redundant. so just bear with me for one. One of the explanations given for the original discussion around the original parking was the expansion of Shady Oak. It says future expansion. Is there an idea of when the expansion of Shady Oak is or may be planned for?
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, members of the commission, in our comp plan, city comp plan, it's planned to be a 3-lane road at some point, so, but there's no plans at this time.
Okay.
Just based on the anticipated traffic volumes in the Golden Triangle area.
So it's traffic as well as a walkway or a trail, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right, exactly.
So sometime in the future, so we're just reserving it. The second one, this is, I'm trying to read the Exhibit A and the findings and conditions from the packet, and I don't know if these are supposed to be highlighted or not, but number C, or letter C, the first sentence is the plight of the landowner is not due to circumstances unique to the property. When I read the text in the couple pages above it, it seemed that not was in a different part of that sentence. Because it seems to me that this is due to the unique circumstances of the property, as explained in the narrative right underneath it. Or am I misunderstanding the grammar?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we can certainly double check to make sure that there's consistency between the city code requirements regarding circumstances unique to the property, and just make sure that's stated correctly.
Yeah, I mean,
certainly the intent is that in this case it is unique to the property,
right,
for those stated reasons.
Right, because if I go back just a couple of pages up to, I guess, page 2, the sentence basically says unique circumstances mean the problem is due to circumstances.
Right.
So I just want to clarify that's
correct.
What
correct.
we mean there. Let me double check. Yeah, that was the only other thing I had. Thanks.
That's a good catch.
Good catch, thank you. Yeah. And just to re-emphasize your point, Commissioner Villarreal, I think the rub last meeting was that if the road was to be expanded, that the city may have to purchase property from the property owner. That would be difficult to reconfigure because they were closer to the property line. And now with the setback as it is with parallel parking, the road can be widened with very minimal disruption. Am I simplifying that, or did I say that okay, Rod?
Basically, yes. The issue the last time, as I recall, was the parking was very close to what would be the future purchase of a needed right-of-way for the trail and/or widened roadway, which we have to pay for the land regardless. But if we're damaging parking or taking parking away, then we have to, in addition to that, we'd have to replace that parking or pay for that loss of parking.
Right. Okay.
And if you allow me to add to that, I think there's also just the greenway aspect of Shady Oak Road there that I know I felt was important, and I think we've been able to, again, come to a good compromise here that allows the nuts and bolts of the potential expansion of the highway as well as maintaining a somewhat of a greenway there, consistent with the rest of Shady Oak Road. I think it's a great compromise.
Thank you. Commissioner Meddy?
I'll just second that. While I still, there's always that concern of, this being the only road or only building on that street that has, this parking in front of the building like that. But I think what they've shown with the compromise, and then also I think the improvement in the landscaping from what's there now, I think it's just grass. So that and the hopeful improvement of the facade, which I think will come with their leasing efforts. I think overall we're getting something that's a lot better than it is today.
Yep. It's a positive improvement as well, and it retains our building stock in our city for future use. Might be a good time to ask for a motion to close the public hearing, if anybody's willing to do that.
Mr. Chairman, move to close the public hearing.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
We had a motion by Kirk, second by Freiberg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is closed.
Move to recommend approval of the variance number 2018-03 based on staff recommendations and information contained in the staff report dated August 9th, 2018, and the plan stamp dated and August 2nd?
Yes.
August 2nd, with a review of the wording in findings C to ensure consistency.
Second.
Okay, motion made by Kirk, seconded by Mehdi. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Project passes. Congratulations. Look forward to the improvements. Thank you for coming. Okay. Next up is our third public hearing for the Lions Tap Site Improvement Project. Lions Tap is located at 16180 Flying Cloud Drive. It's a request for guide plan change from neighborhood commercial to rural on .22 acres and from rural to neighborhood commercial on 0.01 acres. Planned unit development district review with waivers on 2.2 acres. Zoning district change from rural to highway commercial on .25 acres, from highway commercial to rural on .12 acres, from right-of-way to highway commercial on .51 acres, and from right-of-way to rural on .03 acres. We have a site plan review on 2.2 acres and a preliminary plat from 2 lots into 1 lot and 1 outlot on 11.69 acres. Julie, would you take us through the staff report, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, as stated, there are a variety of requests before you this evening as a part of this application. We're going to kind of take a step back a few years, and probably in 2014 there was a PUD concept review that came before the Planning Commission and the City Council that contemplated just this project. With the Flying Cloud Drive and Spring Road improvements, it was known that there was going to be some shifting of the roadway, and as a result there would be some excess right-of-way in some places and some not excess right-of-way in other places, so there would be some shifting that would go on. So at that time there was a PUD concept review that was shared that contemplated this development. Because the design was not finalized for the roadways, the legal descriptions for exactly where those property boundaries would be and where the zoning lines should be couldn't yet be determined. So the PUD concept review went through the process in order to kind of set the stage and the expectation that at some point this project will move forward. So that gets us up to where we are today. So as a part of this, there are several site improvements that are contemplated. The building improvements are really limited to a small vestibule that's being added. I'm going to call it on the south side of the property. There's a very small entryway there now, and they're adding a bit larger vestibule there. That's the only piece of new construction with regard to the building. They're expanding that. Otherwise, the majority of the improvements are site improvements with regard to parking lot, retaining wall, access to the site, those types of issues. Previously, there was access to the site from Flying Cloud Drive as well as Spring Road. With the roadway improvements, access will be provided only via Spring Road. So as you can see by the drawings that are depicting the layout of the parking lot, there will be some expansion of the parking lot more to the west and providing more of a turnaround area as well. So staff is recommending approval of the proposal as it sits before you. As I mentioned, there's a little bit of shifting between zoning lines and comp plan guiding lines. Because we are in the process of updating the comp plan and the areas to be modified are so minor, staff's talked with the Met Council, and Met Council has advised that there does not need to be a formal process to approve that comp plan amendment, because we can fold that into the overall Aspire update and the acreage is minimal. In addition, there are several waivers that are being requested. This site, as mentioned, has been in operation for decades, so it's a bit of a known destination within the community. So there have been other reviews and approvals that have been given, whether that's been for variances or things in the past. But what you have before you this evening, those waiver requests reflect the condition of the proposed project before you this evening. So there's a request for front setback waiver with regard to the building, as well as front setback waivers with regard to parking. So in the majority of those cases, that waiver is being requested due to an existing condition, and also taking into account that in some cases where the waiver is providing less of a setback than exists today, that's the result of additional property being provided for the right-of-way for those roadway improvement projects. Also, the site in its current state, prior to construction, did not meet the parking requirements on site. So there was some agreement with off-site property owners in order to allow parking off-site as well. With this project as proposed, all parking would be able to be provided on-site, which is consistent with city code requirements. So I believe I've hit on everything. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. And as I said, staff is recommending approval.
Julie, are there other jurisdictional approvals that have to be made for their request about off-site grading in the right-of-way, which is to the south of the south parking lot? They have a note on their plan. There are some steep slopes. They're trying to avoid a retaining wall construction to the new Flying Cloud Drive. Is that us, or is that somebody else?
Mr. Chair, I defer that question to Mr. Rue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, the grading that's on the south side is tied a little bit to the county project as well as this project. I think the current situation is such that the county has is grading to not impact the parking lot, where the existing parking lot. So there's some, with the reconstruction of this site, the parking lot moves back. And in order to avoid a wall, the 2-to-1 slope between the trail and the new parking lot avoids that wall, because they really can't. Some of the preliminary drawings we had a wall there, but that wall was within the drainage and utility easement, which we don't allow. So this was a compromise in order to avoid that wall, to have a steeper slope provided along that face. So
Okay.
it's some of it gets graded with the county, some of it gets graded with this, but it's
And the county's okay with the 2-to-1 slope?
most of the county's grading out there will be 2-to-1 out there as they're proposing it. Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I may
Yes.
jump in.
Yes.
I neglected to mention in my introductory comments that there are a few conditions that staff are proposing that need to be addressed prior to city council review. For instance, I mentioned the small vestibule that's being added. The applicant is continuing to work on the building material requirements and providing those to us to ensure that they meet city code requirements for that, as well as the trash enclosure. City staff has had ongoing conversations with the applicant. We saw new drawings just today, so we're confident that forward progress is being made, and we will get that buttoned up before city council review, as well as some minor changes to the landscaping plan. There's adequate landscaping provided on site, however, a little bit of an inconsistency with how city code calculates how much of your perennials and grasses can be counted towards the landscaping requirements. So just again, a bit of a tweak, and I know that the applicant has been working on that because we've been in conversations, and again, we're confident that will be provided before city council review, satisfactory to city code requirements.
Thank you. Getting back to that vestibule addition, the staff report, and you just mentioned also, it's a singular vestibule addition. However, the plans indicate that there's 2 vestibules being added, one on the south and one on the east. Maybe the applicant can speak to that when they come up.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it's my understanding it is just one vestibule being added, but I'll let the applicant speak to that in a little more detail.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions of staff before we ask the applicant to come up and give a presentation? Is the applicant present? Just state your name and address. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm John Shardlow with Stantec Consulting,
Could you spell your last name?
Shardlow.
Thank you.
There is a single vestibule. There were two views of it, one from the east and one from the south. So it was just looking at the same vestibule from two different perspectives.
Okay, so the notes on your plan C1.01, where it shows vestibule addition twice, there's a note, we could ignore that then?
Yes,
Okay, so it's the one on the south.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's just creating an airlock. And I've got a couple of exhibits that I'll show you, but it's basically just creating an airlock. And it's the minimal size needed to meet ADA requirements, so to be able to get a wheelchair in and close the door behind. So Julie, could I have the presentation?
There we go.
There we go. Actually, I want to just start out with this aerial photo because I think it does help identify some kind of key aspects of this proposal. If you look at the aerial, there's a couple things that pop out. I would assume that this is taken probably about 10:30 in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning. And on the other side of Spring Road, on the Peterson property, there's 12 cars that are parked there. Those are employees. Also, if you look to the immediate west of the Lions Tap building itself, you see the direct curb cut onto Flying Cloud. And there's another 9 cars that are parked there. You have an existing building on a tight site surrounded by unique topography. Back in 2013, the Notermans were contacted by Hennepin County indicating that Flying Cloud Road was going to be improved and that the direct curb cut onto Flying Cloud would be removed. And so a facility with something like 72 parking spaces was losing 9 parking spaces, which is pretty significant challenge. So rather than going through the condemnation process and contesting that and trying to get damages, we went to Hennepin County and talked to them about what we thought could be a win-win. You'd want to straighten Spring Road anyway so that it would intersect with Flying Cloud at a more perpendicular angle. And in so doing, there would be some surplus right-of-way. So we basically talked to them about giving away the curb cut and cooperating with them on the grading in exchange for them deeding the property that was surplus right-of-way, and that's essentially what's happened. So with me this evening are the owners of the Lions Tap, Bert and Bonnie Noterman. They have been the owners since 1977. That truly is an iconic spot in the city of Eden Prairie. Started out in 1938 as a vegetable stand, and a couple years after that they started serving beer. And I think it was 60 years ago that hamburgers were first served there. Not nearly as good as the ones that the Notermans serve. So it's been there quite a long time. So also with us is Jack Perry from Briggs & Morgan. He's the attorney who's been helping us with all of these transactions and a relatively complicated project. So obviously Julie has gone through and reviewed all of the details, and that can seem kind of complicated and daunting. The fact of the matter is it's an existing site, and we've gone through all sorts of iterations with the plans, working with the highway department and working with the city on the utility improvements. And so really what we're doing is just squaring off the property, and as a result we have a variety of different slivers. So I want to just give you a brief presentation and start out by saying that we have reviewed the staff report. It's complete, it's accurate. We have no quarrels with the staff report. We've reviewed the conditions of approval, and there's certainly nothing there that we can't live with. There's a couple of them I want to just talk with you about, but obviously there's nothing there that we couldn't live with. So the history of the application, again, back in 2013 we started this process, and again Ms. Klima talked about the fact that we got unanimous support from the Planning Commission and the Council at that time for the guide plan change and for the planned unit development concept. But since that time we've really been working with the county and later with the city as those plans were refined. So if you think of it, we were basically losing both of our accesses, and the parcel was going to change shape. And even minor changes to those designs caused us to go through multiple site plan review iterations. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we don't have any differences of opinion with the staff at this point. We've been working with them for a very long time. The site is constrained. I'll talk to you about that a little bit.
But I think the other thing, just from a big picture standpoint, is this really represents a very substantial reinvestment in the Lions Tap by the Notermans. A way that someone could have gone would have been to, have some big lawsuit damages for the taking of that curb cut and so forth. But the Notermans have been and continue to be committed to the community, and they're making a very substantial investment for that facility for the future. So I want to just give you a brief summary of some of the factors that influence the design and talk about some of the conditions of approval, notably the parking lot screening. One of the areas of the site, the parking lot to the west, which is the area, Mr. Chair, that you were just talking about at the top of the steep slopes. I'll show you a section through that. It's actually 12 feet above the elevation of Flying Cloud Road, and right about a curb cut and maybe 2 feet from the top of that slope. So we'll talk about that in a minute. The vestibule elevation is actually representing an 18-inch increase from what we'd originally submitted. And that was because when the architect finally looked at it and looked at applied ADA requirements, it had to be 7 feet 6 inches in order to meet ADA. Talk about the trash receptacle and then the landscape plan revisions. Obviously, it's difficult to see black and white graphics even with a little bit of color on them, but you can see here on this graphic where the realignment of Spring Road is shown. And so the area between that realigned road and the current alignment and the existing site plan is the area that we had to work with. One of our objectives from the very beginning was to get as much parking on that side of the street as we could. Even city code requirements for parking for restaurants often underestimate the need that those restaurants may actually cause. So one of our core objectives going into this was to get as much parking as we could. So the details, again, all of those little triangles and so forth, if you really sort of cut to the chase, we're really just sort of squaring off the site. And where there's a small little triangle going up, we basically are putting that to the residential area to the north, and likewise the little sliver that goes along the Flying Cloud, we're squaring it off and making that swap. So there's just some very simple back and forth, if you will, between the residential and the commercially guided and zoned parcels. The yellow is basically the area that is the surplus right away. So the staff report actually did a very nice job with the graphics to kind of summarize those issues. If you look at the change in the existing zoning up on the top, the new red line is the new property boundary. So you can see it's added the right of way from Spring Road. It's added a little bit of the residential area from the north and removed a little bit of the rest of it. It's because we have needed to get the parking lot on the west side expanded, we had to encroach a little bit back into the slopes and do some retention back there with a living wall. And then likewise down below it shows you the existing zoning and how that changes in correspondence with the comprehensive plan. So we looked at the site plan very carefully, again, to try and maximize the amount of parking that we could accomplish. But this is also the side of the building from which all of the service occurs. And it's also the best part of the site for handicap accessibility. And so we wanted to make sure that we designed the parking lot layout so that we could get loading vehicles in there. So that's what the turning radiuses that are shown on this graphic show. It also provides an opportunity for new handicap spaces that are in much closer proximity to the building with a much easier access and egress. And likewise, a much better relationship with respect to the trash receptacle, which, as Ms. Klima said, will meet all the city's requirements in terms of building materials and will have a front door. And likewise, we wanted to make sure that we had adequate emergency vehicle circulation, and so that's why there was some discussion in one of the earlier staff comments about sort of squaring off the end of the parking lot, but we really couldn't do that and have adequate turning movements for a full-size fire truck. And likewise, in doing that, we also would have lost 4 parallel parking spaces back there, which are very dearly needed. This is a graphic that just kind of quickly shows the existing trees that will be lost as a result of the grading. A pretty substantial grading that's going to take place to let this all happen. Not only for just complying and removing the pavement and grading the area that was right away,
But also, as you'll see in a minute, we're actually going to have a buried pond, essentially, a buried stormwater treatment system, all of which had to be excavated, all of which had to be plumbed and connected up and so forth. So it wasn't possible to save those trees, but we did have a landscape plan that we basically planted every aspect of it we could. Again, as Julie said, we're confident that we can meet city code. There's some of those trees that we may just plant a little larger in the beginning. We also didn't calculate any of the plant materials on what we're calling the living wall along the back when we calculated the caliper inches that were provided. So we'll work closely with the staff and make those adjustments. So this graphic may be a little bit difficult to see. We didn't really have time to put any color on it today. But this shows a section drawn through that parking lot on the west side of the building. So, Mr. Chair, you asked about the steep slope. MnDOT doesn't intend to mow that. They intend to use one of their seed mixes, which is the sandy soil, low maintenance seed mix, which is little blue stem and some ryegrass and so forth, and it grows to be about 3 feet tall or so. And so the parking requirements for the city require that the headlights of the cars be blocked. It's one option. About the only option we'd have here on this side to do that would be to put a small fence in. We're concerned about that from a snow removal and snow storage standpoint. We think it'll just continue to get torn up. So one, we want to first confirm the height of those plant materials that's going to be on the top of that slope, because we think it may very well be 3 feet tall, in which case it would block those block the headlights. But the other thing you can see is that the direct line of those headlights is 12.5 feet above the cars down on Flying Cloud Road. So again, we'll work with the staff and come up with a solution, but we're hoping we can do it with plant materials. And it may also, we've had a very good, very cooperative working relationship with Hennepin County, and they may very well let us plant something like a sumac or some other natural plant on the top of that slope that would accomplish that screening requirement. The other areas where we need to meet that requirement, we're right up against the drainage and utility easement. It's a very tight site, so we've got some constraints there, but we may very well end up doing a small wall in a couple of those areas to meet that requirement.
Mr. Shardlow, I apologize for interrupting. Could you go back to that last graphic? And just for the purposes of everybody understanding this graphic, civil engineers who prepare these drawings sometimes draw on two different scales, a vertical scale and a horizontal scale.
Yes.
Can you tell us, is this a one-to-one true scale in both vertical and horizontal relationships, or is this one scale laterally and another scale vertically?
Excellent question. It is the latter. It's exaggerated on the vertical because when we did it the other way, the cars looked like miniature cars, and it was kind of difficult to visualize.
Okay, I just want to make sure the commissioners understand that graphic with the different
The
scale
dimensions
points
are
there.
accurate. The car, the vertical dimension is exaggerated.
That's correct, but the slopes are exaggerated in the vertical dimension.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification. I apologize. You
No,
may
thank
continue.
you.
So that means in reality it'd be like more stretched that way.
That's exactly correct, Commissioner Meddy. If you wouldn't mind going back to that graphic again, Mr. Shardlow. So that dimension, that 12.3 feet he has on the right-hand side of the graphic, and just to the left of that you see a diagonal line representing the slope of discussion. It looks like it's about on a 45-degree angle, which would be a one-to-one slope. If it was 45 degrees, that's a one-to-one, one horizontal to one vertical. With the exaggeration of the scale of the diagram, the two-to-one slope, it would extend further to the left, so that would look like a shallower angle in reality once the slope gets built. And so graphically, it's a compact drawing. It's been squeezed like an accordion left to right.
Thanks.
You may continue. Thank you.
I knew we were going to spend so much time on it, I would have colored it. I did mention the walls. There is a need for some retention walls, and some of those will be a typical sort of block wall, but we're excited about the possibility of using what's called a living wall, which is a section of wall that has seed in it, and then there's plantings behind it, and the plantings that are in the wall actually end up creating a completely green facade on the side of the slope, and the plant materials themselves also help retain and stabilize the soils. And this was just another graphic I put in just to indicate that the access and circulation, the ability to service the trash receptacle was another one of the things that kind of kept us from being able to maximize the number of parking spaces we could get there. So one of the reasons why we were not able to get more parking than we did is just because we needed to maintain those turning radii for service, both of the trash receptacle and deliveries to the building. We did go from 75 parking spaces to 112 parking spaces, and there's also 21 motorcycle spaces shown on the site, so not an insignificant improvement. So this was the graphics that were sent over by the architect this morning. Unfortunately, weren't put on letterhead or plan sets that had the architect's name on it, and basically it's going to be face brick and permanent finished materials, and the roof's going to match the building. So it's a very simple little box structure, but we'll have those notes included and submitted to the city for staff's review. So this is the vestibule. It's that right where you see down vestibule addition. It's basically a 7-foot 6-inch vestibule, and the door will open out from the inside, and there will be an airlock there, which would be an improvement from an energy conservation standpoint. The good news is it doesn't change that front yard setback. That's still as tight as it was, but there is about a 6-inch encroachment on the western edge of that vestibule into the drainage and utility easement. That's a change that we just literally saw today, but it's literally a 6-inch encroachment into the drainage area. The existing building, can't move the building. If we're going to meet ADA requirements, it's going to have to be 7 foot 6 inches wide in order to accomplish that. Finally, I wanted to note the fact that in 1951, there were gas pumps in front of this facility. They have been abandoned for that length of time. I think the gas pumps went in 1933, and they were removed in 1950, 1951. Because you see the diagonal lines there, that's the underground stormwater treatment system. It's both a collection and an infiltration system, so the water from all the catch basins on the site get conveyed into that system. It's stored there, it infiltrates into the ground, and also, if need be, does have an overflow that goes directly into the pond across Spring Road. So there was concern expressed when the staff's development review committee looked at it about the possibility of contaminated soil and water in that drainage system migrating into the drainage system. We had American Engineering Testing do a phase 2 analysis, or at least a portion of a phase 2 analysis. They did a boring, the one that's shown on the left, right in front of the door, is the closest to where the pump actually was, the fueling facility. And then the other one was a little bit farther to the east and closer to where the infiltration system was. What they did find some contaminated soil in the one that's the closest to the door, but fortunately the one that was closer to the infiltration area was clean. And so we're confident that there wasn't any contamination that migrated that way, and that the area over there is clean. This has been supported to the state duty officer, and it will be reported to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, and there's a program and funding available to clean up the contaminated soil, so we'll be proceeding with that. So thank you for your consideration of our requests. We would respectfully request approval of the applications. Again, we're quite confident that we can work with staff. I did neglect to say at the beginning how much we've appreciated the cooperative relationship we've had, not only with Hennepin County, but also with city staff. Planning staff has been great, and city engineer Rod Rue and my team have worked back and forth as the lift station has moved back and forth along the frontage, and every time it moved, it changed everything else. It's like kind of a three-dimensional puzzle, but we've really appreciated that cooperation. And again, from my perspective, of somebody who's been working on this for a really long time, I feel really good about the outcome, and I think it's going to be a reinvestment, if you will, in an iconic restaurant in the city. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scheidler. Appreciate your very thorough presentation. Stay up here for questions if you don't mind. We also appreciate Lion Staff's a great community member and an asset to the community, and I'm sure other people here do also. Appreciate your fine comments about our city staff. We think so as well. In the staff report, you were urged to reconsider the amount of pavement in the parking area, and I believe also maybe the circulation. And I have a few comments to make that'll lead to some questions that maybe you're prepared to answer at this point or not. First of all, I noticed that you're recommending wider stalls than code minimum, and I think that's a good idea for a retail establishment like that, especially when the stalls are in 90-degree orientation to the aisle. Similarly, the risk goes down for car dings if those stalls were a little narrower but placed at an angle. I find that the new site layout avoids your dead ends, and I think that's a good planning objective. But if you were to change both of your loops to one-way circulation with 60-degree parking and 9'6" wide stalls, you would reduce the amount of pavement, increase safety, and meet other objectives. So that's one comment I have, and I didn't hear anything in response to the staff report's urging of that. It didn't sound like you guys were taking a second look at that, and I would ask you to strongly take a look at that. But before you answer that, I'm going to jump on another issue also with regarding the parking lot configuration. It appears as though we're being asked to look at front yard variances to the public way, the brand new public way, when your client owns 9.5 more acres behind the building. And so I'm finding it very hard to square up the variance request with all the land you have back there. By adding a couple more feet to the retaining wall, that parking lot could be pushed back. You have the land, and you're already adjusting the property lines accordingly to meet your parking plan. So I can't square that up. And so I really need help with that. And so those two parking issues, the location of the parking lot being pulled forward instead of pushed back where you have the land to do that, and the configuration that was urged by staff to have you take a look at a second layout of the parking layout.
Could I have the presentation back? See if I can get to the specific request that I understood from the staff comments was to square off the parking lot and to eliminate that circulation loop on the end. And that's the response I gave, was that we needed that in order to have emergency vehicle turning radius. The front yard variances that we are requesting, primary one is to the building. Are you referring to the little bit of parking that we have right in the front?
I think you're going to find a lot of empathy for the existing building location. Yeah. I can't speak for others, but from my perspective, yes. And I think it's a noble gesture to add more parking, and we're all for this. Believe me, I'm all for this, I should say. It's just that the crowdedness of your parking configuration up against the public way, when you have so much land behind that's available for this purpose, and you started to use some of it already, in your words, squaring it off to make the available parking work for you, I'm not understanding, why did you stop there when you could have avoided the variances?
The one thing that doesn't get conveyed in a plan view drawing like this is the steepness of the slope behind the facility.
Sure.
I mean, we, in the current configuration, had some sections of retaining wall that were 20 feet tall. And so the idea of just pushing back into that slope, it's not nearly as easy as it may seem. And we were really kind of what we thought pushing the envelope in terms of the size of those retaining walls as it was. So it was really a cost issue and just the implications of trying to fight that landform so much.
Sure. And maybe that's why I brought the two subjects up at once, is because if you were to look at a one-way circulation with 60-degree parking, your total dimension of your out-to-out stalls would decrease, and that could afford you almost leaving the property lines where they are. And I'm not going to design it for you, but I think they play off of each other, and I think an effort to look at something like that would be worthwhile.
Well, I will pledge to the commission that I will look at it, but we have done probably 13 different parking layouts, including angled parking. I can't remember the exact reason why we rejected the 60-degree parking in favor of the one we had, but I will pledge to you that we will look at it again.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mr. Charlo before? Yes, Commissioner Freiberg? Commissioner Freiberg, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I like that term that you use, iconic, because I've gone there myself for 35 years of those 40, and parking is, it was a good problem. It's a problem that is very popular, and I'm aware of what you're talking about, the back of that space. Now, did you say it goes upwards as high as 150 foot, that steepness? Did I hear that right?
I didn't give a
Okay,
elevation.
okay, that's why I wasn't sure if I heard that right or not, as far as the back of that lot. But I just wanted to interject as far as that, the effort as far as increasing it, those 42 spaces, I just think it makes a lot of sense, because I sometimes wonder how, the way it's configured right now, emergency vehicle, if it came there, for instance, kitchen, whatever, fire, that'd be kind of tough to maneuver as far as the way it is, especially if there's the cars, because it is very narrow. So I think, from my perspective, I understand what Commissioner Farr is saying totally. I do know what he's talking about as far as possibly moving it, a little bit different. I support the concept itself. I do understand totally what Commissioner Farr's concern was off that, and I'd like to back up that I would like to see consideration on that for you. But the word iconic is good. I like that.
Great. Commissioner Meddy?
Two quick questions. One, what is directly south of Flying Cloud Drive here? And then second question, just on the, and this might have been in the plan somewhere, I just didn't see all the details. For lighting this parking lot, is it going to be all new LED lighting?
Answer to the second question, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, is they will be all LED lights. In terms of what's south of Flying Cloud Road, it's privately owned. Some of it's farmland, some of it is wetland.
Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner Villarreal?
So first question, I wanted to clarify something that I think you said. You said that there was 21 motorcycle spaces?
Yes.
So the sheet C1.01 says 12 motorcycle spaces?
I may have inverted the two. I'm sorry.
Okay. So, and I guess they're just going to fill in the parking in the spots themselves?
Yes.
Okay. And the second one, and I guess I could say this generally, is I would love to see at least 2 EV spots in here to allow for electric vehicle charging. Wherever you see fit, I would just love to see some electric vehicle charging. Since you're building new parking, why not take the opportunity to put a couple of EV chargers in there? That's just for consideration, but I would just like to start seeing EV charging in any new parking lot configurations. Thanks.
Any other questions of Mr. Charlo before we let him sit down? Thank you very much. We'll
I
stand
did
please.
misspeak on the parking. It's 112 new car parking spaces and 12 motorcycle spaces.
112 cars, 12 motorcycles.
So
Thank you.
So it is 12 then, not 21. Okay.
12, not 21. That's correct. Okay, this is a public hearing. And if there are any members of the public here that would like to address the commission, please step forward. Seeing none. Coming back to the commissioners. Mr. Rue, can you talk about the north property line between this outlot and Lot 1? There are a pair of 5-foot D&U easements proposed on the preliminary plat that are typical for lot separations like this, and there are tall retaining walls on this Lot 1 side. If the purpose for the D&U is to afford utilities to navigate their way around the property between the outlot and the lot, with the retaining wall construction, as well as in the retaining wall details, the horizontal geogrid reinforcement in the back of those retaining walls being within and underneath that easement. Is that an appropriate or solution? Is it adequate? Is it not recommended? Ought the retaining walls be located further north, or should the easement be widened so that the utilities could be at the toe of the retaining wall instead of on top? Loaded questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, as you mentioned, the easements are typical, and it's also standard that there's no retaining walls in those easements. In this case, there's probably a reasonableness factor that I'm not sure how many utilities would actually be in that easement. We haven't really addressed that specific question about what kind of geogrid they would have, and if we would allow that into those easement areas. That would just have to be something we could have, it could be part of the developer's agreement, or a separate encroachment agreement, or even something else as far as not even placing those there if that becomes a problem, so.
Okay. Not a big deal. Okay. And are there any concerns from the standpoint of the two different types of retaining wall structures, the living wall, as well as the, it looks like a small format modular block wall? I didn't see the clarification on whether it was small format or large format concrete block. I believe it's small format. Is it okay with staff that we have two styles on the same property and roughly the same relationship?
Well, this whole site is, as was mentioned, is pretty tight, and in order to kind of make this all work, there needs to be some, probably some compromises made on this. I think the living wall is an effort to kind of provide a little bit more green than just a block wall. Mm-hmm. But we have not seen the details of exactly what they're doing. As far as the design, that would typically be a building permit issue that would occur after the approvals. But your point about the easements and so forth would have to probably be addressed as part of the ongoing approval of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask what might be a stupid question of the rest of the commission? But to me, and I understand your point, Mr. Chairman, about the variances on Flying Cloud Drive and the desire to minimize variances. And yet part of me is looking at this and saying, what's the downside to these variances? Mm-hmm. To me, variances allow, yes, it's a city ordinance, and it allows consistency in how we approach, city property. This, to me, this piece of property, given the history of it, given the reconstruction of Flying Cloud Road, and kind of the unique position of it, virtually, I don't want to say nothing across the street, but, wetlands, farmlands across the street, and really no neighbors, to me, doesn't raise as much of a flag regarding the variances. So, I just wanted to throw that out, and that's what's been going through my mind. And is there a flaw in my logic there, or is there something else that I should be thinking about?
I'll try and take a swing at it. I had thought about that as well, frankly, and it probably wasn't the sole purpose that we were adding on more variances just to the stack, as much as the variance then caused them not to be able to screen.
Okay.
And it's a new, busy road.
Yeah.
And even though there are no neighbors, it's an improvement to an iconic location within our city. And I'm all about visibility for all of our retailers, and I don't want to hide the building or anything like that, but their own variance has now is now an excuse for not being able to screen the parking lot.
So that's the trade-off that was
Yeah.
coming through in your mind. I understand.
And I've
that.
heard 4 times tonight that this is a tight site. They have 9.5 acres in their backyard.
With some
Vertical, I understand.
constraint in there, so-
Of course. They're already resigned to fact building 10-foot high retaining walls.
Yeah.
Okay, make it 12, you know.
I hear you.
Yeah, so that's where I was coming from.
Okay.
It wasn't the fact that I was afraid of more variances as much as the city was urging them to take a look at reducing the amount of pavement, and I thought one way could do it was the one-way circulation with the 60-degree, and the view from Flying Cloud Drive with that 2-to-1 slope. You're looking at the underside of the oil pan of an F-150 there, and there's no screening.
I hear you. Thank you.
So that's where I was coming from, and I'm very interested to see if other commissioners have similar or different views on that.
I'll speak to that. I think you make good points. In my head, you know, before you guys had made these comments, I thought when you take these two variances separately, they're each very justified. I didn't really think about how, you know, one kind of causes the other, and I think that is one good point. But taking them separately, I think the parking setback variance is, wouldn't normally have a problem with that because of, you know, I think the unique characteristics of the site being that slope. I mean, I do appreciate how expensive that can really be. It's just completely cost prohibitive to shift all of that back. So it's not a huge distance that they're asking the variance for, and also just seeing that there's another what looks to be in excess of 40 feet until you reach the road. You know, the parking is already really far off the road, so I don't have a huge problem with that. The other one being the parking screening. I think two things that make me inclined to agree with it is the fact that there is that change in elevation, and there's nothing across the street. You know, I don't want to say that we should be screening cars from people driving in their cars. I don't care about that. It's really, you know, screening for adjacent uses. So maybe there's a stipulation we could come up with. It is if that were ever to be residential across the street, that's where I think there's real concern and sensitivity to that. I'm not sure even the developability of that area south of there. So that being nothing down there, and again, me not being really concerned with people in their cars having to look at cars, it makes me inclined to approve the screening variance.
Mm-hmm. If you want to make any more comments, sure.
I was just going to say, I concur as far as what they were just talking about. I can see a lot of positives in that aspect. Again, sensitive to what you're saying. I do
Sure.
understand what you're saying on that.
Sure, good. Different viewpoints, please.
So if I do my math right, my geometry, which is sketchy, so I'm comfortable with the way the parking's laid out, especially on the west side, because if I do my math and think of a one-way circular and you're turning all the parking spots at an angle, then I could see where you would actually have lighting problems on the road. I think having it be at a 90-degree angle to Flying Cloud, you're minimizing the headlight issues of people going back and forth on Flying Cloud. In other words, I'm driving this way and the lights are facing this way, whereas if they were turned, then they are sort of looking at me. So I think having it 90-degree, to me, solves some of that screening issues. If I did my geometry right, which I might not have.
If I can add one more comment, I think the issue here is, or the solution, if we truly need one, because I'm leaning towards saying this isn't that big a deal, but if we could get a creative screening solution here.
Sure.
You know, I think
Sure.
I think the proponent talked a little bit about that, and the possibility of getting a creative screening solution. I think that takes, because I hear that's the major issue that was in your mind, and that might solve the problem without changing the variance.
Good point, Commissioner. I see the applicant is approaching the podium already, so we would welcome your
more than
comments.
happy to do screening in the area down close to Flying Cloud Road. We will do it with some form of fencing that'll match the materials that are being used on the trash enclosure, et cetera. That we're happy to do. I just wanted to say that if you actually were going to try and go back into that hillside to get more parking, the highway department has pushed that access road as far away from Flying Cloud as possible, just for safety and sight distance. And so we're really entering the site right up at the extreme north part of, granted, the commercially zoned portion of the property. To actually gain parking, a full parking stall on that side of the road would require a tremendous amount of grading and probably 2 or 3 different tiers of retaining walls going back up the slope. So we did look at it. It was really just cost prohibitive.
Okay, 2 comments. First off, the landscaping you were offering at the bottom of the slope, I don't think that addresses what we were talking about. I believe we were concerned about the screening of the cars from the public way, and at the bottom of the slope, that does no good. We were talking about maybe the headlight glare and seeing the underside of the cars at the top of the slope. So on your property, right at the right-of-way, on that westernmost parking lot, those however many stalls are there, dozen or so cars, that row of cars on the left-hand side of this diagram, if there is a way that you could screen those vehicles, your proximity to the property line that you're asking a variance for is not only problematic because of the variance itself, but the fact that you can't provide the level of screening that the zoning code requires. And so we're struggling with that. If you were to ask for a variance but still provide the screening, that's easier to swallow. But your variance request includes an inability to comply with another portion of the zoning code, which is the landscape screening requirement. Right?
Understood.
Okay, thank you. And the second point you were trying to make about the movement of the curb cut, if I failed to convey that properly, I didn't mean to infer that the curb cut off of Spring Road would move to the north at all, nor would most of the parking lot configuration. It was solely the western loop and the southern loop that could be compacted by using one-way circulation geometry, so that would minimize the intrusion of you actually going uphill to the north. It would help the variance on the south, and it would help compact things just a little bit. It would reduce the pavement that staff mentioned, as well as remove the burden of you going further into the hill too much more. I don't want to create a greater burden for you to dig a 30-foot tall retaining wall. There's a point of reasonableness. We understand that.
Okay, understood. I mean, just point of clarification, it is a planned unit development, and the idea is to have flexibility in the design of the project. And so we've been trying to work with reasonable compromises to try and find a reasonable solution to the site, given all of its constraints.
Sure.
When I heard you talking about screening and proximity to the right-of-way and talking about there not being any residential on the other side of Flying Cloud, I thought you were talking about the parking that's down in the corner of Spring Road and Flying Cloud. And what I said in the rest of my earlier remarks was that we will look at that, and we will come up with adequate screening for that. And back to the western parking lot, I'm completely confident that we can find a way to screen off those cars, working either with the county to get permission to do some planting at the top of the slope, or if need be. What we don't want to do is have a small fence there that's going to just get beaten up every time they try and remove snow from the area. So I heard your concern. We'll work on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, good.
I'd like to make just a quick comment to address that. If, I'm not gung-ho about needing the parking cell screening, but if we do, I think a landscape type screening would be much preferred over a fence, because I agree the fence is just going to kind of, over time, it's not going to look as well. I think it will distract from the building and really not add a lot of aesthetics to the site. So if there's some sort of hedge type bushes or something that could be planted there,
Correct.
that would be the preferred method.
And in fact, they are asking for permission to grade on that county property, as we talked about earlier. And so if they're asking permission to grade, I can see no reason why the county wouldn't allow some form of landscaping at the top of that slope. That would seem like a reasonable thing. Unless Mr. Rude disagrees with that, I think that could be one strategy that they could employ.
One other comment, I think, along this lines that I kind of thought about when we were talking about the stall size here is this specific row of parking that's along the southern line. If we were to maybe have some stalls be compact, or even not necessarily compact, just small, full-size stalls, I think you could create just a little bit of space, a foot or two, to have more room to do that planting. I think it would allow you to add, I'm guessing, 2 stalls within this area by having those compact stalls. And I think there's still enough, large stalls across the site. There's gonna be plenty of people in, small, mid-sized sedans that could utilize that singular row as being smaller stalls. But I think that could be a way to add more room to provide for some additional landscaping, as well as potentially pick up a couple stalls.
Okay, very good. So, if I can summarize, I don't want to put words in your mouth. If we made a condition or conditions saying that you will look at landscape screening in those areas that we have concern over, as well as looking again at a parking reconfiguration, if possible, that could meet the objectives of your project and the city's concerns that they brought up in the staff report, that would go a long way.
Can I just ask, I think that if we're going to be, putting forth a motion to approve this, having some condition on the landscape screening is achievable, but your suggestion to look at the parking reconfiguration, that seems like it's a substantial thing that, are you suggesting that we ask them to come back with something different, or how would you propose we execute that?
I would not. I'm satisfied with our discussion that fundamentally we're concerned about, I'm concerned about the impact to the public way that the dimensions are causing. And I empathize with the steep slopes on the site. My disappointment was solely based on reading the staff report saying that they had urged the applicant to look at different parking lot configuration to save pavement and to achieve some of these objectives in a different manner. And I didn't get that sense that they had tried in their presentation. So if they want to continue, if I may suggest to have them continue to work with staff, and if staff is satisfied after this, that they've made their best attempt, then I'm satisfied.
I agree.
I don't mean for them to come back.
I agree
I
with
think
that.
we have a quality project here and a quality.
One more review, just to be sure.
Yes, before they go to city council. Is that a fair condition to place on this project, Julie?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, certainly if that is within your purview, you can certainly make that a condition of approval that prior to city council review, they take a look at those items and provide some additional information for staff to review.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Villarreal.
So if I've understood the staff recommendation, part of the recommendation is already to do an additional, the applicant should provide additional information around compliance screening. So it seems to me that part of your recommendation is already embedded in the staff's findings. I don't see one in here regarding the parking that you've asked for. I'd say from my perspective, I'm comfortable with the parking as they've proposed. I can certainly understand the Commissioner Meddy's proposal, idea of having some portion of the area be deemed compact cars. I think it's purely up to the applicant to determine if that's the most reasonable solution for what we're talking about around pavement and perhaps a bit more on the easement. But I myself am comfortable with the parking as proposed by the applicant here. The screening seems to be already embedded in staff's recommendations.
That's a good
Yeah.
observation. Specifically,
Condition A.
Commissioner, E, right? 1E?
No, there's 1A.
1A.
Provide staff with
1A,
plans that
yep.
includes
Code
city code
compliance screening.
compliance screening for the
Screening.
parking areas.
And I would gather that the applicant can take the gist of our discussion today
Absolutely.
and revise accordingly in advance of the city council meeting and in their meeting with staff.
Yeah, I think this is an excellent discussion, just in the sense of communicating what some of our thoughts and concerns are.
Right.
And yet, I agree with you. I think the plan as it stands now, particularly with that condition, is satisfactory for me.
Yeah, yeah. The parking layout does work as designed.
Yeah. And if we look a little harder at the screening, the applicant's understanding our concerns about it, I think a good solution will come out of that.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to close the public hearing?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Have a motion by Commissioner Freiberg and a second by Kirk to close the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I will move to recommend approval of the Lions Tap Site Improvements Project based on staff recommendations and information contained in the staff report dated August 9th, 2018, and plans stamped dated July 30th, 2018.
Second.
Have a motion by Commissioner Villarreal and a second by Commissioner Kirk. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Congratulations. Appreciate your listening to our
forward to it.
comments, and
We'll keep supporting, keep Prairie like we have for 40 years, the community. We want to keep giving back, and we want to make the place look like it's a decent place. So,
thank you very much.
And you've done
We
a
really
good job.
appreciate you part of
Thank
the
you.
community. Thank you very much. Okay. The last public hearing we have on the agenda today is the code amendment for Chapter 11 Transit-Oriented Development, TOD, and Town Center, TC. This is a request to amend our City Code Chapter 11 to address the TOD and TC zoning districts. Proposed amendments provide consistency between the districts where appropriate. And I believe Julie's going to discuss these elements and have a short presentation for us.
Yes, sir, I am. So as stated before you this evening is a code amendment to address both the town center zoning districts and the TOD, or transit-oriented development districts. So just a brief overview, and then we're going to get into a little brief history, then we'll get into some details. So the code amendments that are proposed for you this evening address process, as well as performance standards, terminology, and some housekeeping items. As with any code amendment, upon a little mature reflection, there's always a way that something can be enhanced or defined a little more clearly, and we found that to be the case as well with the town center and TOD. So the town center district was established in the early 2000s as a zoning district. Actually, zoning districts, there are 3 sub-districts were created, as well as design guidelines to further implement those zoning guidelines. Then about 10 years passes and we bring forward the TOD zoning districts for the city's review and approval, and they were adopted then at the end of 2016. So these 2 zoning districts are very similar in that they both promote an urban development pattern. They have similar design features with increased density, pedestrian connections, a rich mix of uses, but they do have their own uniqueness to them as well. The town center really strives to create a walkable, compact town center, larger area, where the TOD is intended to somewhat be a retrofit into a suburban developed business park area and more concentrated around the town center stations and not intending to be an overall center for the entire community. So they're similar, but yet they have their own unique characteristics. So once both districts got adopted, staff knew at some point we'd have to go back and rectify where there maybe is some inconsistencies in order to promote like development where appropriate between the two. So that's what we've done, and that's what we're back in front of you with this evening. So the town center district has town center zoning has 3 sub-districts: mixed use, residential, and commercial. The TOD districts are mixed use, residential, and employment. So you see that there's some direct alignment with 2 out of the 3 in both of those. So with regard to process, there were some additions proposed to the town center district in order to match the TOD for consistency. So the first issue is simply a process related to nonconformities, that they're governed under Minnesota State Statute 462. That provision is further clarified in the town center because upon mature reflection, we know that it should be included there so that folks know any nonconformities are governed under that section. In addition, when the TOD district came before the city, it was determined that all proposals, due to the flexibility that's needed in these already developed areas, that a PUD process should be required for all of those in order to allow the city and the developer to work with one another cooperatively to address specific site conditions rather than just a blanket code requirement. So that is being carried forward to the town center as well, knowing that redevelopment in that area, that flexibility is going to be necessary in that location as well. And then in addition, requiring a traffic impact study or a TDM plan and parking plans. That's something that staff and the city suggested be included in the TOD. It's also a good idea to have that in the town center as well as we're looking at those redevelopment areas. From a performance standards standpoint, pedestrian and off-street parking facilities, landscape standards, and parking regulations were looked at in a little more detail for the town center district as well. So in the TOD areas, we talked a lot when that ordinance went through the city's review process about the mix of uses that would occur there, whether it's vertically integrated uses with some active uses on the main floor that either are restaurant or retail, and really activating that pedestrian corridor, whether that's a little bit wider space so there can be outdoor seating or outdoor display areas. Again, trying to create that same dynamic feel in the town center. So again, carrying that over for consistency's sake. With regard specifically to some changes that were made in the, or proposed rather, are proposed to be made in the TOD, is to provide for a minimum ground floor height of 12 feet versus 10 feet in the TODE district. So the TODE district, or TOD employment area, requires all frontages on a primary transit street to be commercial ready. And the intention there is that, again, for that very dynamic interactive use between pedestrians and the built environment. So in order to be commercial ready, a minimum of a 12-foot ground floor height is what staff is recommending based on review of the building code, needing to have that additional area to tuck in some of that HVAC requirements, as well as just creating that storefront area, because those should be commercial ready. Now I want to point out that this is only a requirement for those commercial ready spaces on the primary transit street. So it's not every TODE parcel that would have this requirement, but only some of those on primary transit streets. In addition, there's some tweaking being proposed to the town center parking. As you can see from this graph where the red just really pops out at you, some of that is more housekeeping, spelling out dwelling unit instead of DU, just to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about. There is a bit of a change in the town center commercial, changing the minimum parking for retail from 4 per 1,000 square feet of floor area down to 3, and the maximum from 5 to 6. The reason for that is largely because the town center really does promote, or
6 to 5.
6 to 5, sorry. Got ahead of myself, thank you. The purpose there is really to promote that shared parking or district parking that the code really strives to see through the design guidelines as well in that town center area. And then also to modify the office parking for town center commercial from 4 per 1,000 down to 3 per 1,000, again, consistent with the TOD. In addition, just noting that a parking demand study may be required. That's going to be something we'll have to take a look at on a case-by-case basis, and that proof of parking can be included in that parking demand study. It doesn't say that it has to be approved, but it can be considered. So staff is proposing that as well. We also took a look at the definitions within both sections of the code and wanting to make sure that if 10 years ago we used one term, we're using the same term in the code here so that it doesn't invite question in the future as to what is really meant by this and what is the city looking for. So we took a look to line up those terms and definitions, and there were no change if we found none to be necessary. If there was a same term but different definitions, we've reviewed those and selected the best one that really got to what the purposes and objectives of those sub-districts or those specific performance standards are. And we've also added some new terms and definitions because they were present in one code but not in the other. So examples of that are visitor parking, public open space, and ground floor height. Other amendments, the town center, we are proposing to change the provision of parking facilities to off-street vehicle parking standards, again aligning with the language that's used in the TOD, and then clarifying in both areas that usable open space should be usable outdoor open space, because there were other areas of the code where we talked about the outdoor open space and it invited some question as to what was really being contemplated. We're just providing some more clarity here. And then in the TOD, permitted uses already allows business and professional offices. For clarity's sake, we're proposing to add the word clinics because we do see a lot of clinics in those areas. There is a community need for that. It makes sense in those areas, and just removing that question about whether or not a clinic is a permitted use in those areas. And then, as you can see, some minor housekeeping changes, adding the abbreviation for feet or minimum and gross floor area, or GFA, to the text, just to provide that clarity. And then we found some duplicate text kind of tucked behind an image, but when you played with the document, it popped up again, so we just took that out to make sure we weren't making the same point twice unnecessarily. So that is the amendment that you have before you this evening. You do have a copy of the entire section redlined so you can see where the insertions and deletions are provided. Staff is recommending approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Julie, very much. I sense the commissioners may have a number of questions, and perhaps now might be a good time just to, yes?
I have another comment to add.
Go ahead.
Staff did do outreach to a couple of property owners who were very involved with the TOD review back in 2016. Those particularly were Liberty Properties and Evine Live. They were very involved with the TOD review and spoke at the public hearings. They followed the process all the way through to the end. So staff did do outreach to them to inform them of what the changes were, as well as let them know about the public hearing this evening. And in your packet, there is a letter from Liberty Properties, and they expressed some concerns with regard to the language that is being proposed. If you take a look at their letter, I think it's 7 or 8 different points that they make. Only one point has a direct relationship back to the amendments that are proposed here this evening. The remainder of their comments reiterate or revisit topics that they raised as issues under the original review of the TOD. So staff did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Weibland from Liberty Properties last week and let him know that we would be carrying this letter forward as part of the packet. To summarize that conversation, Liberty was interested in understanding and ensuring that there's continued flexibility as development occurs in these TOD areas, which is where they own property more so than in the town center. And, you know, part of that conversation is what I spoke to earlier, the fact that the city is requiring all of those projects to go through a PUD process, so that flexibility is inherently built into that, rather than just looking at a global, these are the requirements for TOD. We have that opportunity to understand how it impacts a specific site and its surrounding areas. So I did want to speak to the fact that we do have his comments included in the packet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay poised for questions. At this time, though, as long as we do have a public hearing here, let me just take a moment to invite anybody in our audience that would like to speak on this topic to approach the podium at this time. Okay, thank you. Seeing none. Let's see. I don't know how many questions there are, but I've got a few scattered as I've gone throughout. So perhaps instead of going down.
Can I just make a general comment
Yeah, go ahead.
initially? I actually was on the planning commission for that town center ordinance, and it was breaking new ground for all of us at the time. So I think this review is particularly applicable, because I think we have evolved and matured as a community relative to this type of zoning that we want in our city. And I think cleaning up some of those original town center comments or cleaning up the code there is just a really good idea. Because, as I said, we were all kind of plowing new ground at that point in time. And I think we've plowed a lot of ground since then. So this is a good effort.
Good context. Thank you. So just in terms of organizing our comments, we could go down the row and do this. I'm wondering if it's better maybe to just not necessarily go page by page, but maybe topic by topic and get everything fleshed out instead of person by person. I'd like to start with the definition of that ground floor height, Julie, and only came up because in reading that letter that you pointed out from Liberty Property Trust, they seem to be under the impression as though the definition is 10 to 12 foot ceilings. And the definition that you're creating now is a floor-to-floor height, which is inclusive of the second floor thickness. And so there could, in fact, be a variety of construction methods and means used to build the second floor, whether that's hollow core precast plank, wood frame, other elements of concrete, steel, etc., that would result in variable ceiling heights below that floor. But the purpose of the ordinance is to clarify that it's a floor-to-floor height and not a floor-to-ceiling height. And so I would think that that would please Liberty Property Trust, but more to the point, get that definition tied down. So I'm happy to see the definition being tied down in that respect.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is something in our review that staff wanted to make sure that that was clarified, because there was no mention as to where that measurement was taken from. And as you know, as commissioners, sometimes that becomes, you know, those details make a big difference. So providing that additional clarity I thought was necessary. We worked with the building official to make sure that it was also consistent with building code and as well as their expectations from a building code standpoint. So
Okay.
thank you.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Then, if I may, I'll just take subdivision by subdivision, and commissioners, please be additive as we go through this. In subdivision number 1, which is page 11-14, paragraph E, Julie, you made some wordsmithing there. You added the phrase, "the need for parking," and you struck parking needs and requirements. So now the thrust of the sentence promotes strategies and designs that decrease the need for parking. And then you go on to have a list, and you say including compact mixed-use development patterns. Okay, that's one. But off-street parking. I don't think off-street parking is a strategy that decreases the need for parking, nor is the comment about structured parking. those are parking solutions, but those aren't strategies that decrease the need for parking. The other ones are.
Let me give an interpretation, which I don't know if this is their interpretation, but it could be the need for parking on a specific site development. So you need less parking in this restaurant parking lot because there's on-street parking and the public parking ramp across the street. That might be what that is, and I'll let Julie answer if that's what the intent of that is.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Commissioner Meddy is exactly right. In addition, again, looking at mature reflection, and the language as it originally read was parking needs and requirements. Well, in some cases, aren't those the same things? So just kind of simplifying the language in less words sometimes is more. So that is the approach that staff was looking at as we crafted this revision.
I like that interpretation. Okay. On the next page, 11-15, oh, I'm sorry, that was subdivision 1. Anybody have any other issues on subdivision 1? No, thank you. Subdivision 2, definitions. Building break. We've talked about the building break before, and refresh my memory maybe on why it is solely a recess in the facade and not a choice between a recess and a protrusion. They both offer shadow lines and that variation in the facade that maybe we're looking for. And the definition now includes some dimensional suggestions of 2 feet minimum deep and a width of 4 feet. It's probably not an arbitrary, but I am curious as to how staff arrived at that. And I'll tell you from an architect's perspective, a 2-foot deep recess does trigger some structural challenges in just the basic beam and column setup of a building facade. I'm all over building breaks, mind you. So I'd just maybe like a little clarity from staff on how that got rewritten.
Right. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, with regard to the first point regarding protrusion versus recess in the building, once you provide the recess, you've provided the protrusion. So that is why it addresses one, but not necessarily the other. With regard to the specific dimensions that are provided, those dimensions, I believe, are a reference back to the town center, as well as the city's design guidelines, where we give some direction about that and expectations as to what those minimums should be, so that that minimum is set, so that we don't have somebody coming in with a very minute difference, and they're able to say, well, I've met the requirement. By clearly stating what the expectation is up front, it lets everybody understand what that is, and we can move on to the next issue.
Good, so there's a point of consistency there.
Correct.
Between, excellent,
Correct.
Excellent.
I have a comment on
Yes,
neighborhood commercial definition.
please.
I think this is sort of the biggest one for me. Reading through this, we have a zoning designation that's called neighborhood commercial. And one point is that, is this confusing? Should we just say neighborhood commercial means any use allowed in the neighborhood commercial district? And if that's not the case, maybe we could call this community commercial, something slightly different. That would be one comment slash question, but I kind of want to go through my thought process here with all the comments I have on this. Comment number 2, when you look at the neighborhood commercial zoning, that's really reserved for, like sort of, maybe the small neighborhood or gas station sort of in a very residential area that's not meant to be commercial, whereas the TOD district and the town center district are both in the center of town where the action is. So it's not necessarily, it's where the commercial is going to be, not where the neighborhood commercial is. So it kind of seems weird to call these areas now neighborhood commercial when they're in fact the intense commercial. But I understand, that we do not want an IKEA in the TOD or the town center. I think that's the intent of this, is to avoid IKEA and to have these, smaller shops and service shops. So aside from the name, that would be my one comment. My other comment is when we talk about the definition itself and limiting the size. I'm kind of flexible here with I kind of want to hear what others think about the size restrictions, but if we stick with what it's saying here, I feel like making the exception for a grocery store, we could maybe expand on that a little bit. I'm just thinking of a Walgreens, something like a Walgreens going here. I think that's a neighborhood use. It's there for the local community. It's where you go pick up your things and your what pharmacy type uses, but then also just your regular quick runs for supplies. So most Walgreens are a little bit over 10,000. I want to say 14, 15, between 10 and 15 from what I understand. Walgreens and CVS's, the typical suburban ones, they can be as small as 10,000 square feet in urban areas. But something like this, I think, would make it hard for something like a Walgreens. So is there a way to expand the exception for grocery into something a little bit broader than just grocery? Again, open to people's thoughts if they disagree for some reason, or if there's any other types besides like a grocery and a Walgreens type store that they could think of. But those are sort of what stood out to me when we're talking about this definition.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So the neighborhood commercial terminology is one that exists already in the town center and the TOD zoning district. So staff's not proposing adding that. That terminology is already there. With regard to a potential conflict between the reference in the TOD and town center and then back to the, I'm going to call it traditional zoning district, there is language early on in both the TOD and the town center districts that say these definitions in these sections are what apply to town center and what apply to TOD. So it does provide separation, if you will, from the original neighborhood commercial. With regard to your comment about a different terminology, we also do have, as a city, a community commercial zoning district. So there gets to be a point where there's only so many terms that you can call something without it, meaning something different. With regard to the comment on the size limitation, again, that's not language that staff is adding to the code. We're proposing to add it in this definition, but this regulation already exists elsewhere in the code. So we're just carrying it forward, again, to communicate it upfront and clearly to folks who are looking at our code in order to put together a plan so they understand what the requirements are. These 10,000 and 25,000 square foot limitations, if you will, or restrictions were put in place with the original adoption of the TOD zoning district.
Doesn't the PUD process also allow some flexibility in there for waivers?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, of course, if somebody came in with a waiver request for 12,000 square feet instead of 10,000, that's something that could be addressed through the PUD process.
And the drive-through facilities which are prohibited in this new language have always been prohibited in this?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's correct. Again, we're just communicating it in another location so that as folks, development community folks are using this language, things don't get missed or overlooked.
That was debated in the original town center discussion.
Sure.
And the conclusion was drawn to prohibit them.
Good job.
I'm for that.
I have a question about that.
Commissioner Villarreal.
First thing, drive-through is inconsistently spelled throughout the sections, including you can look at N versus the last sentence in Q. Drive-through is spelled different ways. And you probably should capitalize them. But regarding the definition of drive-through facilities, I just want a clarification that things like what's at Jerry's or at Lunds and Byerly's, where you drive to pick up the groceries, is excluded from the definition of drive-through facilities. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'd have to take a look at the specific definition of drive-through to see exactly how it's worded and how that would apply for the grocery pickup.
Okay.
Same question for Commissioner Meddy's comment about pharmaceutical retailers. Walgreens, CVS, they have drive-through pharmaceutical pickup versus maybe conventionally we all think of drive-throughs for restaurants and coffee only. So a variety of different drive-through facilities may be requested from different building types.
Again, during the original discussion, there was drive-throughs for banks and things like that. And I believe this is going way back in memory, but I believe that all of those were meant to be excluded in the town center area. And it was more of the pedestrian orientation and traffic flow and that sort of thing that drove that. Again, going way back in the deep memory there.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would concur with that in theory, but I'd like the opportunity to go back and look at the code with a specific eye toward the grocery, just to make sure that we're clearly communicating that, because if a planning commission member has that question, somebody else will have that question as well. We want to be clear up front.
Because to me, that would sort of then imply there'd be other questions related to parking, because if the grocery store is on one side of the street and you're parking at the parking lot a block down across the street, and you're probably unable to wheel your grocery cart 2.5 blocks away from the grocery store, you got to have a pickup somewhere to pick up your groceries, because the grocery store probably doesn't want the grocery carts leaving or going too far away. You got to have somewhere else to pick up your groceries, especially if you're coming in, because that's the closest grocery store. You don't maybe live above it, you live where I live. So there needs to be some, I don't know how this is all going to relate to one another. I mean, conceptually it will work with like the CVS and the pharmacies as well, but at least for the groceries, if you're going there to do grocery shopping, either there has to be sufficient parking at the grocery store, or there has to be some allowance for where you're going to pick up your groceries.
I think you make a good point, and to clarify my comment about how I think a Walgreens should be able to go into this type of zoning, I would agree that, but it couldn't have a drive-through. I don't think it should. I think that's the intent, to not have a drive-through. So, but I think what you're bringing up is maybe an interesting thing, that we should look at the definition of drive-throughs, because so many retailers nowadays are changing where you have these, pull up to the stall and they'll come out and drop it off. So that's not a drive-through, but then you have the buy release where it sort of is a drive up to sort of a door. It's not a window, but so I think we should allow for these sort of drive up pickup type, uses, more like a stall, but actually doing business at a window where you're doing the transaction. I know there's part of the definition can include that. I think that we should take a look at that and make sure that we're happy with the definition of drive-through facilities in general, because just with how business has been changing.
Good discussion, thank you. Subdivision 3, any questions? Subdivision 4, any questions? 4 gets pretty deep here. 11-21, page 11-21. There's a statement of policy at the bottom of that page, Julie, under the development standards for TOD residential. Last sentence, buildings shall be located and designed to take advantage of views of nearby natural amenities and where significant shading of lower buildings will not occur. That seems sufficiently vague to cause you a lot of questions.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that language is a carryover from the purpose statement of the town center residential to provide consistency between the two. In addition, there is language that's proposed in the TOD and town center that staff can require and request shading analysis to be done dependent on the site-specific proposal. So that's built into the process as well.
Okay, good. I would hope that we would be a little more accommodating for buildings that have shadows cast over them if they're not used for residential or those types of uses that appreciate sunlight, like a parking deck or a warehouse wouldn't, we wouldn't care if shadows go over them as much, obviously.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, and that again leads to the conversation about a PUD and taking a look at the site-specific issues rather than trying to plan for everything in a vacuum.
Right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I don't know, on a hot day, some shady areas might not be that bad.
Right. A day like today, perhaps. Okay, I think, let's see, subdivision 4 continues on. I'm turning pages still. 28. Okay. 30. Okay, subdivision, I don't know how we got to 6. I must have flipped past 5, but I'm on subdivision 6 on page 11-31. Anybody have any questions on subdivision 6 or subdivision 7? Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have a question on parking, but I think I'll wait till there's a substantial red line around parking towards the end.
Okay.
And I
yes,
have an
there
overall
is.
comment regarding some parking questions.
All right. We're going into section 11-20, or .27 now on Town Center District on page 1134. So on page 11-36, usable outdoor open space, I'm sorry, the paragraph below that, K, you're adding a paragraph K, visitor parking definition. Visitor parking does not include long-term or all-day employee parking or parking of delivery vehicles engaged in loading or unloading goods. Unloading goods. So courier services like FedEx or the Minuteman delivery, Uber waiting for you, or Jimmy John's sandwich at lunch. Are those unloading goods?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the visitor parking definition is one that was created with the TOD district. As you'll recall, there was a concern by property owners in the TOD areas or anticipated TOD areas that surface parking was not encouraged or promoted, but rather structured parking was. And as you know, a lot of the existing development in those transit areas is existing surface parking. So there was a compromise, if you will, that occurred through the creation of the TOD district to allow for some surface parking, but limiting it to visitors. So that definition was created with the TOD district, and we're carrying that over to the town center as well in order to make sure that, again, that there's some consistency between the two. So for instance, it's, as it says, it's not intended to provide for all-day parking. It is intended to provide for just that short-term parking. The concern with regard to delivery vehicles was that in the industrial areas, in particular, that somebody might have a vehicle that's part of their business that gets parked there all day, and then that spot is not available for individual consumers or office users to be making those short, abbreviated trips back and forth. So, you know, that's something we could certainly tweak, but that's the intent behind it.
If I were to propose maybe something that will sound a little bit better, or, you know, more towards what your concern was. Parking of delivery vehicles. So the visitor parking does not include long-term or all-day employee parking or parking of delivery vehicles engaged in making short-term deliveries. So it doesn't say of what. And it also implies that it's not sitting there all day. Delivery vehicles engaged in making short-term deliveries.
So I guess there's 2 points. One is that clarification, and the other is whether or not we want to allow those short-term deliveries. I believe it's very hard to police short-term delivery drivers.
Yeah, no, you're right.
They're going to park darn wherever they want to.
Doesn't even need to be a stall.
Right. They're in and out 5 minutes. They don't want to get caught. It's just bing, bang, boom.
It's pretty much the spirit of the thing, you know, as far
Yeah.
as, I think the intent is like you're saying, it's the all day, you know, just because, you know, I can kind of see the all day, but that, the spirit of the delivery, like you say, the Jimmy John's, whatever,
Yeah.
you know, that makes sense.
Yeah, your Uber driver's going to park just in the middle of the
Absolutely.
street to wait for you.
Yeah, we don't want to make it too tough.
And Jimmy John's is going to pop out of the car and, you know, deliver and back in his car before anybody notices or honks. So
But that'll
those are
prohibit
those-
anyone from parking there all day.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner
So
Villarreal.
I'll raise my question here. Julie, could you remind me what the rules are regarding food trucks?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I believe that the food truck regulations, food trucks are allowed in the industrial districts, but they are not allowed in the commercial districts. There is a licensing requirement through the police department as well that they need to go through, excuse me. I can't speak to what all of those conditions are with regard to licensing, but from a use perspective, I hope that answers the question you're
Would food
getting
trucks
at.
be allowed to park in the TOD or TC?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the town center and TOD sub-districts may allow that because there are town center commercial. There's also TODE. The TODE is intended to be more industrial in nature. I'd have to take a look at what those specific restrictions or regulations say. I don't know that it calls out specifically TOD, E or TC commercial. But that's certainly something we can take a look at. The intention was to not allow them in the commercial district so as to create conflict with existing bricks and mortar type of stores, but allow them in the industrial districts where there's more of an employment base.
So I'll make a statement that I think we shouldn't be protecting incumbent businesses from competition through the use of these codes, and would like to see somewhere an accounting or allowance for food trucks to park either closer to residential or as part of the commercial areas. I think it's consistent with the theme and the purpose of these rules around creating a community and options for customers who seek sustenance from vendors that are not otherwise present at or in the area. And that would apply largely, I think, to the areas where there's surface street parking as opposed to ramps, because I don't think putting a food truck in a ramp is very conducive to the business of food trucks. But I do think that food trucks are consistent with the theme of the creation of town centers and transit-oriented developments. Furthermore, in thinking of areas like if there's farmers markets, it seems to me that food trucks are also a good source of bringing people to farmers markets as well. So I would just like to see somewhere in here consideration for the allowance of food trucks in these areas. I don't know exactly where to put it. To me, the visitor parking is probably not the exact fit because that's not the gist of the visitor parking area. But I don't see in here opportunities for where food trucks could easily participate to create the sense of community.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we can certainly take a look at the food truck provisions. They're in another chapter of the ordinance, so you'll not see a mention of food trucks anywhere in the zoning chapter because they're regulated either in 5 or 9, I can't remember which one, but through the licensing requirements. But we can take a little bit of a harder look at that and report back to you about that specific language.
And related to that, a separate question as you look at that is whether they also or whether they would be categorized as a drive-through facility. In which case, I'd want them to
I
have
think having the
exemptions.
discussion would be a really good idea, and I'd like to see it broaden beyond just these 2 zoning districts and look at relative to all the zoning districts, which I think is what you're somewhat suggesting, Julie, is having that discussion, because aren't there probably some commercial zoning districts where a food truck could potentially
Absolutely.
be? So I think that'd be a good discussion and not just oriented towards these.
Right, right. They're happening now in our city.
Yeah.
Yeah, they come into our business park regularly, and regulated or
Yeah,
not.
because
I think they're an amenity, and
because where I mean, I don't know if it qualifies as town center, but when I lived in California, there was a mall, and they every Saturday would have half dozen,
Yeah, that's
10
my,
food trucks sitting in the parking lot of the mall, and people would drive to the food trucks.
And that's my point. That
Yeah.
wouldn't, these ordinances wouldn't cover that. And I think that's something we ought to think about.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, it sounds like we have a topic for another planner's report on another evening.
Yep.
So
We do.
stay tuned.
Okay. All right, continuing on. I'm just, turning pages here for us, subdivision 6, subdivision 7. Any comments? Okay, on 1139, there's comments about front yard setback. I don't know how much discussion we had about that. Julie touched on that briefly about outdoor dining spaces. I think that's a nice addition. And then we're getting to the table 4 that Commissioner Villarreal, you said you wanted to make some general comments about parking. Would now be an appropriate time?
I think we just did it.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay, great. I'll add a question there. Julie, in the office category, we're knocking down the minimum requirement for 4 per thousand to 3 per thousand. In straight office zoning, we've got that sliding scale still in our ordinance, right? That goes, depending upon the size of the building, anywhere from 4 to 5 per thousand.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I believe we have that in the industrial districts for office. I believe in the straight office zoning district, there's a set standard, and the sliding scale applies for office as part of an overall industrial use.
Okay, okay. So I'm just bringing that up in terms of consistencies. Staff is still okay with those 2 different metrics applied to office use parking in different districts.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as I'm rereading it, as I'm thinking about all the edits here, and specifically E and F in this section, and H, I'm wondering if it's appropriate for some recognition around the ability to put solar on top of parking structures. There's nothing, as I see explicitly in here, maybe that's a separate chapter, but it seems to me that if you have a parking structure with an exposed roof, there could be stated a preference to utilize, to the best engineering standards possible, to prefer that those be covered with solar. And I'm wondering if that's, if A, that was something envisioned, how that would then fit into the zoning rules that are being written here.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, with regard to solar opportunities, right now there's frankly not a lot of discussion in the zoning chapter about solar. That's not to say it isn't promoted, and it certainly is regulated through other interpretive types of analysis, but there's nothing that would prohibit, with this language as it's presented this evening, there's nothing that would prohibit the installation of solar on the roof of a parking structure or any other structure for that matter. You're seeing solar going up throughout the community, whether it's on churches or schools or the community center or wherever. And in addition, with the city's design guidelines that were adopted in 2016, that is a talking point as to justification for allowing waivers through the PUD process as something that incentivizes the installation of solar.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so as long as we're on parking decks, at the bottom of 11-40 and then the top of page 11-41, a number of paragraphs talking about parking ramps, their adjacency to certain streets, and their requirements for liner building. Paragraph E, which starts out near the bottom of 11-40, talks about, in the second sentence, parking structures shall include architectural elements, ... None of those elements are liner buildings. And then the next paragraph talks about parking structures may also incorporate liner buildings. So that's a may. And then turning the page on paragraph H, then parking ramps facing a public street must be lined on the street facing side with an active ground floor use or commercial-ready space. So it just struck me as maybe 3 or 4 different paragraphs that required close coordination, and maybe they could be combined or somehow simplified so that I didn't have to know if I was a shall, must, or may also.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this language through E through J, and then also subdivision 11 and 12, those are all instances of language that was created in the TOD district, and we're carrying, when that was adopted in 2016, and we're carrying that over to the town center as well, because the town center district today does not have those same types of requirements with regard to submittal of information for pedestrian, bicycle parking, traffic analysis, or building materials or design as a part of parking ramps. It does talk in detail in the town center that parking ramps or structured parking are required or preferred in certain cases, but it doesn't talk about what they should look like or that they're held to a certain standard. So the language that was prepared in TOD, being more recent and recently vetted, if you will, was carried over to the town center to provide an equitable playing field, as well as communicate community expectations as to what the aesthetics for these types of structures should be. But we can certainly take a look at if there's tweaking, but just understand if there's tweaking, there's going to be tweaking then in the TOD as well to make sure that everything is consistent and meets the purposes of each of those districts.
Okay. So maybe my overarching comment is just it's something, as a consumer of many zoning codes, this is something that I'd have to read 4 or 5 times to really grasp fully, and I'd probably call you.
And I'd say hello. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you. You're always so helpful. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more.
Yes.
So again, my apologies if this is not the right place to put it. I also would not mind seeing some language requiring some number of electric vehicle charging facilities for parking. Doesn't really matter where the parking structure is. I just like to start seeing that show up somewhere so that these parking structures are in fact being planned for things like electric vehicles.
Just to add to that, to me that seems like that would be good for a completely separate topic, because I have some thoughts on that as well. I mean, that can really get deep. Also, what if in 10 years all new cars were electric? What does it look like when now it's almost like if we were back in the day requiring free gas pumps at every 2 gas pump stations at every parking lot, and now we're providing 2 electric gas pumps at every like how does that impact us 10, 20, 30 years from now? So that's when I think that could use some further discussion in a separate topic.
I think that'd be a good idea.
It would probably be in some section of maybe a sustainability portion of the code, maybe as opposed to under building regulations, where we don't want to get too much into the functional use of the building in this particular part of the code. Yeah, but welcoming sustainability promotion. Okay, any other comments there on subdivision 11, subdivision 12, 13, 14, and I turn my last page, 11-43. Okay.
I guess just to confirm with Julie on this subdivision 14 landscaping, this is just language that's already in the TOD that we're now mirroring in the town center?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that is correct.
Okay, very good. This is a public hearing, and we already went through the invitation to the public. Nobody came up, so I'll be looking to a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Then a motion by Commissioner Freiberg and a second by Kirk. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Close the public hearing. Can I have a motion to take an action?
I'll move to recommend approval of the code amendment, Chapter 11, Transit-Oriented Development Town Center, based on staff recommendations and information contained in the staff report dated August 9th, 2018.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Commissioner Villarreal and a second by Commissioner Freiberg. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. That concludes our list of public hearings for this evening. We're in the portion of our agenda called Planners Reports now, and the one Planners Report we have is for our Aspire 2040 update for housing and land use. Julie, can you start us off and make an
Absolutely.
introduction?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, so we're continuing on with our theme of reviewing each of the chapters within the overall Aspire draft document. So this evening we have on board the housing chapter, and we have Jonathan Stanley, the city's community and housing and community services manager. Sorry, I bumbled that a little. Present tonight to present the chapter on housing. I want to just remind the commission, again, I know we've talked about it on other occasions, the document is in draft form. The city's working to polish it up, make some revisions. We're really, at this point, wanting to present you the information that we have to date, get your feedback, answer any questions that you might have in order to provide the overall context. Jonathan does have some questions for you at the end of the evening that he would, or end of the presentation rather, that he'd like to get your feedback on, and then we'll move into the discussion about the land use chapter.
Great. Welcome, Jonathan.
Mr. Chair, Planning Commission members, good evening. As Julie mentioned, my name is Jonathan Stanley. I'm a quite new Housing and Community Services Manager here following the retirement of Molly Koivumaki. Happy to be here this evening to talk about the Housing and Residential Area chapter of Aspire. I'll be discussing the three main components of the chapter, which are goals, objectives, and strategies. Give a brief introduction to the existing inventory and some current and projected housing needs, and then follow up with some housing implementation strategies. So the first goal in the housing chapter is to incentivize attainable and affordable housing options for lower income households so they can move to and remain in Eden Prairie. It's a pretty broad and overarching goal. A couple of the specific objectives under this goal are to encourage new low and moderate income housing developments while preserving existing attainable housing options. By attainable housing, I mean private unsubsidized housing, or what's often referred to as naturally occurring affordable housing, and to increase affordable housing development as the city continues to grow. A few of the specific strategies that we want to capitalize on are increasing density on infill sites in the city, encouraging cooperative owner-occupied housing as an alternative form of home ownership, and increasing options for affordable owner-occupied housing and starter homes. The second goal is to work with public and private sectors, other government entities, and the community to envision and finance innovative demonstration projects and developments. As I'm sure you're all aware, in the affordable housing domain, everything is done in partnership. It's not uncommon for affordable or mixed income project to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 funding resources, each with their own requirements and restrictions. So it really kind of takes a community to put some of these projects together. And then the second objective under this goal is to focus innovation on sustainable techniques to further the city's commitment to environmental resiliency. So a couple of the specific strategies is to continue working with developers to close funding gaps and secure external leverage. We're currently working on that with a developer for a proposal, acting as the applicant to the Metropolitan Council to secure financing for the developer for a project. To prioritize, again, infill development using tools such as alternative parking requirements. To encourage solar energy systems to help supply a significant portion of residential heating and cooling needs. And we want to work on actively promoting resource conservation through the city's Sustainable Eden Prairie initiative. The third objective is to promote senior housing opportunities that increase choice and enable seniors who choose to downsize to age in the community. And there's just a single objective here, and that's to work with developers to provide life cycle housing options that meet the changing needs of the senior community. And I want to just mention here too that not only are we looking at the needs of the senior community, but also thinking about the millennials and their housing desires and wants. And that's really where that life cycle housing option comes in. Life cycle housing kind of denoting housing that suits a variety of households in different stages of their life cycle. A couple of the strategies there are to develop facilities that are transportation accessible and encourage inclusion and avoid isolation. Encourage small lot home development to provide stock for those wishing to downsize. We've seen a couple of early proposals proposing to do just that, to go with smaller lot development with either attached or detached product. And then it can be something quite as simple as providing referrals to social service agencies to help seniors kind of navigate their affordable housing or housing options in general. The fourth is to address the aging housing stock to prevent the loss of naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAH housing. This has become a very hot topic over the last couple of years. We're losing this housing at an alarming pace, with the sort of infamous example being the loss of concierge, or what used to be called Crossroads in the city of Richfield. So a few of the key strategies here, the objective is to support reinvestment in older housing stock in neighborhoods that are approaching the lifespans for utilities, equipment, and structural elements. When those factors come together, there's an opportunity to get in, make some improvements to the property, and to extend the affordability, the rent and income restrictions for those types of properties. So a couple of the strategies there might be creating an inventory of NOAH properties that might be under the threat of kind of being upscaled, as one way of putting it. One thing the city's already done is used housing revenue bonds to improve a NOAH property and secure longer-term affordability. We might explore the potential of mission-oriented buyers to purchase and manage NOAH properties. At present, there's 3 nonprofits in the Twin Cities. The Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, Aon Development, and Common Bond Communities have all kind of dipped a toe into this issue. So they are the ones that are coming with, some real financing to help purchase and manage these properties long term. And the fifth and final goal is to prioritize housing around public transit with access to services, jobs, parks, and other amenities. The objective here is to coordinate with the development community to guide residential densities around TOD areas and in the major center area. A few of the strategies there might be encouraging the use of neo-traditional techniques that are pedestrian friendly, create a sense of community, discourage isolation and dependence on automobiles. Utilizing the city's evolving inclusionary housing practice, which I'll speak in more detail about, and which is actually the subject of the questions that I have for you tonight. To guarantee affordability in these key areas is a particularly prescient strategy. And then this may be a good opportunity to look for including mostly affordable properties in proximity to transit. While that may be difficult from a financial point of view, these are households that often need that access to those amenities and the transit in particular. So just to capture a little bit about the current and future need, the city undertook a local housing study in 2017, and that's where these first few statistics come from. Right now we have just under 24,500 housing units in Eden Prairie. The split between single family and multifamily is about 73% to 27% multifamily. And it's expected that long term, that rough proportion is expected to remain about the same. And there's currently a need for over 1,100 affordable housing units. And that doesn't mean that there's 1,100 households that are homeless or anything of that nature, but it's rather that there's a need for housing for about 1,100 households. These may be service workers, lower income workers, who to be housed where they're paying no more of 30% of their income on housing would need a more affordable unit. Going forward into the future, we're projected to need more than 5,700 owner-occupied units by 2040 and have a projected need of more than 1,800 rental units. And there's a particularly pronounced need for more attached owner-occupied housing due to the scarcity of land and for multifamily rental. Just wanted to mention briefly, the Metropolitan Council calculates for each community in the metro region the allocation of affordable housing need. And so just for the decade of 2021 to 2030, they calculate that the fair share for Eden Prairie of affordable housing units is more than 1,400 housing units. As you can see but from this graphic, the vast majority of those units are for the very low income. So 802 units, those are the units that are most difficult to produce from a financial point of view, typically requiring more subsidy than other units. So there's a lot of, kind of a long road ahead in trying to meet this type of demand in the city. I won't go through this kind of laundry list of housing implementation strategies, but I will say that in kind of diving in midstream in the Aspire process, I was quite heartened to see how many tools that the city has in its toolkit. I think we're doing a pretty good job, and there's some things that we want to keep exploring. But just a few of the strategies that we use, certainly you're familiar with our use of TIF, pooled TIF, tax abatement, low-income housing tax credits, again, supporting applications for Hennepin County or Met Council resources. I spoke to preserving, I didn't speak to preserving our existing publicly subsidized housing. That's another area where bond resources may help extend affordability and improve the assets. I spoke to housing revenue bonds a little bit, and once again, kind of a low-hanging fruit item. The power of effective referrals and partnerships shouldn't be underestimated. We also support what are called housing improvement areas. We've been tinkering with the idea of requiring acceptance of housing choice vouchers in new developments and beginning to integrate that into development agreements. We've been looking at requiring affirmative fair housing market plans to support fair housing. That's essentially where the developer has to provide a plan for reaching the least likely to apply applicants, particularly folks that might have language impediment or for some other reason might not make application to a particular property. I spoke to capitalizing on TOD areas and preserving NOAA housing. We continue to use our community development block grant funding to support rehabilitation loans for homeowners in Eden Prairie, to provide grants for seniors who have home improvement needs, to support the West Hennepin Affordable Housing Land Trust, and to provide first-time home buyer assistance and some other uses. And then just to give a brief introduction to our inclusionary housing practice, at current, the minimum expectation is that regardless of whether there's city subsidy involved, to have 5% of the units at 50% of AMI and 5% of the units at or below 80% of AMI. And that is in perpetuity, which is quite unique. We looked at about 5 other communities in the cities that have adopted inclusionary housing policies, and they tend to range from about 15 to 30 years. So trying to secure these units in perpetuity is quite a bold and I think kind of exciting prospect. So these are the questions that I wanted to pose to you regarding the inclusionary housing policy or practice. Should the policy have sort of flat amounts as we do in our case where it's 5 at 50% of AMI and 5% at 80% of AMI? Or might we want to use a developer choice of 5% at or below 30% of AMI, 10% at 50%, or 15% at 80%? Was there a question?
Yes, I'd like to just say something about that.
Yeah.
I just had a meeting with a developer not too long ago, and the inclusionary aspect that's a problem. Okay, if it's rigid, if it's absolute, that's a problem. I like to look at it more as a starting point, as far as because every situation is a little bit different, and it came out very quick in our conversation that there's going to be some resistance as far as to developers coming in with a mandated 10%. We'll just say inclusionary clause on that. One that's flexible as to the need will probably get us more mileage, because it always seems like middle ground seems to get us further along than absolutes. And just food for thought on that, because that just came up and boom, hit me.
Yeah, appreciate that comment. I think it could be argued that giving the developer sort of a choice of a range which is in use in Brooklyn Park and in St. Louis Park, gives a little bit more flexibility as to what kind of income targeting you want to hit. But that is a good point about the mandatory type systems. Second question is, should the policy apply to all development activity, regardless of what it is? Should it be new? Obviously, on new construction, this is something we're interested in pursuing, but should it apply to rehab, renovations, adaptive reuse, non-residential use where you're converting to a residential product? Should the affordability threshold be the same for rental and for sale housing? At present, we are suggesting that they be the same. In the survey of the 5 communities that we looked at, they all were pegging to a single AMI threshold of 80%. So there are some concerns. One, that it's financially difficult for developers to provide this product at 50% of AMI. And there's also some concern that households that are earning 50% or less of AMI may not necessarily be in the best position to become homeowners. So there's a couple of concerns with that. And again, our colleagues in the region are choosing that 80% threshold. And then regarding that term of affordability, as I said, it's pretty bold to require the units in perpetuity, regardless of whether the property is sold, et cetera, et cetera. So a question there, should affordability and perpetuity be required in every circumstance, or are there circumstances where that's just not feasible? So with that, I'd certainly take any questions and appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jonathan, very much. I think if you can leave that slide up there for our use as we're looking and maybe just provide some answers back to you. I might recommend that we just go through question by question and ask if anybody has any comments. I'll certainly vote on the first question to offer the range of options. I think options are always good, and I think it would breed even more creative proposals. So that's my opinion on question number 1. Any other commission members have comments on that?
I do, and just as some background, I work for a local multifamily developer, so I'm in the development realm, and we do a lot of affordable housing as well as market rate. So I think I'll have a lot to say about any of these, but I agree, range of options is good. And I don't know if this goes beyond sort of what our current policy already is and would be sort of too large of a request, but I think a couple of things. One, it would be nice to maybe have a limit to the size of project that this might impact. So if someone's looking to do a 20-unit, 25-unit type smaller development, to not have to meet these. I don't know where that trigger might be, but that really impedes the ability for anything to be financially feasible. And then also, an option to opt out of this and maybe contribute to a affordable fund that the city uses to help finance other things. I know other cities do that. That's one option I find interesting. My concern is, and again, this I might be going back too far because this is already a set in stone type policy, but we limit the pool of real estate developers and companies that are willing to develop in our city by having a requirement like this, and there's plenty of good ones, my company included, that will come and develop here, and the Southwest Station project, I understand they're complying with that, but I think there's a whole ton of companies out there that this is just off the table. They won't look at Eden Prairie because of that. So I think it's a really good thing, but I wonder what can we do to make sure to not be in slower times or whatever it might be. Are we hurting ourselves by not allowing higher end development to occur, or excluding a whole pool of potential developers by having that requirement? But again, I might be going a little too far with that comment.
No, I was just saying, good insight. On the simpler question, I agree with our chairman. I think allowing some flexibility in requirements, ranges, tops and bottoms, things like that is good. Fixed and firm demands, I think just just doesn't work as well.
Another aspect that might be important is there's the two words affordable as opposed to attainable, as far as more that we think about what the differences are between the two. Because I think to reach our overall goal, a nice balance between the two, they mean different things to different people. And my background as far as in 30 years in housing finance, as far as I understand where both are needed, you know, but they also have to fit into, you know, like you say, the overall plan of it, a good balance.
So I would agree with everything about flexibility. Perhaps for the first and maybe only time to compare Eden Prairie to San Francisco, which has a limited footprint of acreage. What you've seen by having strict housing requirements is a shortage of housing and an increase in prices, which have actually then made it unattainable to the middle class. And so having a flexible amount of requirements so that it sends the right message to the market to develop and know that they can get a return on it, I think would be a benefit to the community and make sure that, you know, all aspects of society are able to obtain and afford a place to live. And I have a whole bunch of other questions in the document itself.
Okay.
I think I'd like to add one more thing too that I'm just thinking about as we're talking. The affordability requirement is great to have, so we have 10% of the units at 50%, 80%, whatever we say. But I think one thing to realize too is that the rest of the units are of the new construction product coming online are affordable to people at 150% or more of median income. So actually having, you know, thinking about maybe in this allowing flexibility to actually even have units at 100%. So units affordable to a median income is also for Eden Prairie affordable. I mean, and thinking when you're looking at a development, you know, realizing that, all right, the rest of the units are like super high end and then some are super, super affordable. Well, there's people, you know, at 100% or even a little over median that still couldn't afford the market rate. So again, when we're talking about a range, maybe providing that as an option as well.
Good, okay, I think we've talked through question number one. Question number two, should the policy apply to all development activity, new, rehab, renovation, adaptive reuse, non-residential use to residential conversion? I'm the chairman, I'll start out with, I think it should apply to all residential activity. I'm trying to think of an example where maybe it wouldn't be appropriate, but I think our policy should be to apply it evenly to all of these types of development activity would be my personal preference. I don't think that we should be ignoring opportunities to achieve our goals. We have large goals here, and I think by eliminating all of those project types, we'd be shorting ourselves. That's my opinion.
I think that just focusing on the word, you know, rehab and renovation, that there's this huge gray area of how do you define that. You have this existing apartment building that's been here since the 70s, and they want to remodel all the kitchens, which is a good thing. But if they have to all of a sudden convert 10% of their units to affordable, you know, like what triggers it, I think is the big question here. And does that, I don't want to incentivize existing property owners to not want to spend money on their property because it would trigger something that's pretty huge, I think, for existing properties to have to convert to.
That's kind of where I was leaning too. My first impression was generating new units. I think it's a no-brainer. Yeah. But if you're rehabbing existing units and all, I didn't have as well thought out a criteria as you did.
Well, and I don't have a suggestion either for that. You know,
but that was a little iffy for me.
Yeah. I think we'd want to exclude the requirement for simple remodeling, repainting, recarpet, changes of appliances. If the unit mix stays the same and all they're doing is redecorating and remodeling, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But you're right, creation of new units or what I'll call repositioning a property. If it's a reposition of the property, bingo. That's the phrase that I would hear in the industry more often than maybe the rehab could get into that slippery slope.
So I agree with the new construction, but for the rest of them, I think, much like Commissioner Meddy had talked about earlier, there should be a trigger that, if it's a smaller unit that's either going through rehab, renovation, adaptive reuse, or transitioning to a residential, that there should be some units above X is where this may be triggered, and if it's below X, then it shouldn't. Because again, I'm sort of thinking like where can the investors trying to make some amount of money off these investments, and if they're stuck to too strict of a requirement, that moving non-residential to res just may not make it cost effective, so then you just end up with an empty building.
One other point, I'm not an attorney, but I can imagine an attorney saying that this might be a taking of value from a property. And so maybe the city attorney ought to look at that risk.
Mr. Chair, members, I had the same question, particularly as pertains the in perpetuity clause. I wondered whether that might be, whether there's been any cases around the country about sort of an economic taking of sorts. So I do think that's a good question.
Okay. Moving on to question 3, should the affordability thresholds be the same for rental and for sale housing? Other municipalities use 80% AMI for sale product. Opinions?
No would be my thought, and here's why. I haven't, my company hasn't personally been involved in for sale, whether it's condo or single family home sales of affordable housing, because we have not yet figured out a way, nor have we heard of anybody else who has figured out a way to financially make affordable for sale housing work. Some of the issues being you're artificially limiting the price of the home, but then are the property taxes still based on the market non-affordable value or not? Are you getting people in situations where they can't afford the taxes or utilities or those kinds of things for the home by artificially deflating it? What if they live there for 2 years, they get a raise, and now they're millionaires, they're still living in this home that they got for an extra cheap price? So what do you do with that? And then is the sale price forever, or even if it's not in perpetuity, if it's for 40 years, they can now only sell it to other people who would qualify. That limits the market. It also limits the potential for their home values to go up. Their home values are only ever going to go up as much as the median income goes up. It would move one and the same. So the benefit of owning a home or building equity sort of goes away, and I don't even know how a bank then looks at financing to somebody like that when you have that limitation on the home value.
I know how they look at it. And that would be a problem.
Okay, yeah.
Then
There you go.
You got a good point. You made excellent points, but realistically, you're talking two different things. When you're talking rental and you're talking for sale, there's different ways of approaching for sale. You're totally right what you're saying, but yeah, because then you're starting to bring in what means of actual financing of a single family home. I'd separate them, totally different. Yeah. And I think you're concurring, basically with that. You're saying
And I'll be happy to let you know too if I hear of someone making it work, because there's some proposals in Minneapolis because they require it on for sale housing to see if these developers really can make it work.
Okay. Last question is, the term of affordability is in perpetuity is always feasible, or should affordability in perpetuity be required in every circumstance?
Can I kick in a sec? Just the word "every" is tough. That just jumps when it's every sounds like absolute. All right, there is no absolute. Spirit's good, spirit's excellent, but again, flexible a little bit off of that word "every."
Yeah.
My thoughts on this are a perpetuity is, that's a commitment. That's a big thing. And so many things change over the course of time that's really hard to say. I would suggest one to, I mean, you could maybe go up to 40 years, which is the longest I've heard of in terms of some of the programs out there. But then also after 40 years, a property is now a property from the 1970s, where we talk about, okay, now it's sort of a naturally occurring affordable housing. So the point of building new housing is, you know, it'll, by the time it's 40 years old, I think that sort of, I don't want to say it takes care of itself, but I think that helps. I think I prefer that and leaving that window open down the road because of that fact, and not having something in perpetuity.
I love that comment, and I bet it wouldn't be that terribly difficult to craft a metric around that, whether that has to do with the relative cost of that housing compared to new housing at that point in time, or some other similar metric that's a measurable, something
The term
measurable.
you use, natural occurring,
The NOAA, yeah.
Yeah,
did I-
Noah.
the NOAA.
did I phrase it right? Natural.
Yeah, Noah. Yeah, I think that's great. Is there another way, I don't know if this is appropriate, another way to ask the question? I think Commissioner Meddy was maybe inferring also the economic factors that would affect everybody in the city, state, nation, potentially. And instead of it being in perpetuity on the property, would the city say every 10 years we're going to revisit our in perpetuity clause? And so that would give owners and the general public an opportunity every 10 years or whatever that number is to come back and petition us to say, hey, this in perpetuity thing just doesn't work for blah, blah, blah. And it would give us an opportunity as a city to say, you know, yeah, it's working fairly well. Maybe we got some things to work out, but, you know, give us an opportunity to correct a course at some increment of time, so that we're not ourselves just forcing the issue now forever. Right. Understand?
I have a much simpler view of this. Always and forever are really scary.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I agree.
my colleagues have the data behind it, but just on a gut level,
Yeah.
always and forever are really scary to a
And
lot of people.
If I'm a apartment owner investing in properties across the Twin Cities, and I can buy this one apartment building that's the same in Bloomington versus Eden Prairie, they're identical, other than this one has a perpetuity affordable requirement and the other one's 30 or 40 years. Which one do you want to buy? I mean, it's a big thing from a real estate investment perspective. Anything that's on the title to the property and forever that way. So that's hard. It affects the value, I would say.
Did we provide you the level of feedback you thought and
Chair
required?
members, that's excellent feedback. I really appreciate it.
If you don't mind, I had two quick comments on the some of the goals that we had gone over earlier. Are we able to go to the second slide? I think it's the second slide, the one about the affordable. Goal 1, yeah. So on this one, I like everything, but I would love to see maybe some slight adjustment that addresses the idea of this objective, you know, how we want to incorporate, what did I write down? Or integrate, either incorporate or integrate this with market rate. So the goal of this is to not just plop affordable development in the corner of the city, to somehow have it integrate. So if there's something here that maybe could help address that by either adding that word or something, that would be one comment. And then the other comment I had was on the NOAA goal. A couple of times in here it talks about preserve and maintaining, but I would love for it to also be a goal to help facilitate property owners to like improve, you know, to be able to actually not just maintain, but create, you know, an older property, completely renovate it, but for affordable. And I know the low-income housing tax credit program has a priority to renovate, not just redo, but take a currently NOAA property and completely make it almost like new, but still charge those same affordable rents. And there's lots of incentives for that. So I'd love to see, you know, us also incentivizing to actually have people with a naturally occurring affordable housing to not just keep it to minimum standards, but to improve it in some way would be nice to have.
Very good. Commissioner Villarreal?
All right, could you go back 2 slides to number 2? Okay, so this is where my comments are going to be. Could you define environmental resilience?
Mr. Chair, members, being very new to the city.
Okay,
and
fair enough.
not very familiar with that term, I might defer to a colleague if maybe Julie has a.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, with regard to the sustainable initiatives that the city is undergoing, whether it be Energy Action Plan or Sustainable Eden Prairie, I think those terms are evolving and may mean different things to different people. So most likely part of the implementation strategy out of Aspire is taking a look at some of those sustainability features and figuring out how do we blend those then into specific, whether it's zoning requirements or other policies, and at that point aligning that. At this point, I don't know that there's a specific definition, but more of a broad overview applied to some of these terminologies with regard to sustainability.
Oh, that's a fine answer. Since it's embedded in an objective, I would expect that that term has some meaning, since it's supposed to then be applied to as an objective. So have that be spelled out somewhere in this document, I think would be useful, because I don't know what that means. Because I mean, anyway. The second question I have on this is the second to last bullet: encourage solar energy to supply a significant portion of residential heating and cooling needs. Why is it limited only to residential as opposed to encouraging commercial and industrial to optimize their rooftops? I know it's probably for it's housing, but I'm just curious, is it somewhere else?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there are other sustainability objectives and strategies identified throughout the plan. As you know, we've talked about the call-outs for sustainable and resiliency. In this chapter, much to Commissioner Villarreal's comment, it's attached rather to housing because this is the housing chapter, but you will find similar recommendations and direction elsewhere in other chapters, whether it's economic competitiveness chapter, the community facilities chapter, throughout the document.
Sure. Okay, and then why is it only spelled out for heating and cooling as opposed to overall energy consumption?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that's certainly something that we can continue to take a look at.
Okay. So those are the comments I have on the slide. I had a couple of other related comments. So in the document, under the same objective, there's reference to something called passive solar and active solar, and I don't know what that means. So objective 2B, so on your slide, there's a clause between commas that is in the document, but not on the slide. It says, encourage solar energy systems either active or passive. And I don't know what active or passive solar is. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, again, that's something we can take a look at and making sure that they're, as these terms are distinguished, that they're also defined throughout the document.
Okay, fair enough.
And can I just chime in, because I want to try to answer your question. My understanding from experience is an example of a passive solar system would be, I don't know exactly what it's called, but there's rooftop water heater systems where instead of a gas-powered water heater, you'd actually pipe the water up through the roof where it's heated, like exposed to the sun and heated via that way. And I think like the actual solar panel is an active. I could be wrong there, but I think that's an example.
We
of
had
it.
friends who built what I considered a passive solar here in Eden Prairie, and it was an earth-sheltered house oriented towards the sun with windows, windows and some of the reflective curtains and that sort of thing, so that, they were set up to absorb the sun's energy with very little very little mechanism associated with it, where active solar would be something more that would be either a photoelectric or some sort of active, mechanized system. That's been my understanding.
Okay. I just bring it up because in my world, where we talk about solar, we don't differentiate between passive and solar. It's just solar in the energy world.
Sure. And I'll add another definition for you also. That's right. In my world, active solar is actually using the sun and turning it into energy. And passive solar is reducing the heat impact from the sun through strategies like Commissioner Kirk just pointed out, shading of trees, putting buildings underground, facing the building the other way, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. In thinking about the trees, this has come up in other areas of the country that has seen substantial growth of rooftop solar, is the interaction between when you can and cannot cut down trees. Because there's been examples in California where the homeowner has the solar to support a city incentive to put solar in, but because of their neighbor's trees, which are too tall, it's impacting the ability to implement, the two potentially conflicting city goals. So that's just something to think about. And then the last one, somewhere in here, it talks about, I'll say boomers and millennials and their housing desires. As an extra, I'm disappointed that I'm not represented. Because to be slightly devil's advocate, one of the reasons why we moved out to the suburbs is to get away from people. And so having some space in where we're in having some space between the houses is actually why we moved out here, not having be everyone stuck together. And so not to say I'm representative of Generation X, but it's just interesting that yes, we're the smallest of the three generations, but we're just not referenced at all in what our preferences are for housing.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Will you be providing a supplemental presentation on land use, or is that Julie?
That'll be Julie.
That's me.
Somebody else? Okay. Well, thank you. On behalf of the Planning Commission, welcome to the City of Eden Prairie, and appreciate all your efforts to date, and staff's effort in general for this housing package was thorough, and we really enjoyed hearing about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Did well. We are ready.
Fantastic. So in reviewing the land use chapter, we're going to review the overall sections of the chapter. Those are broken down into 5 categories. A lot of this information is not going to be new. It's the same type of thing we've talked about at previous work sessions with City Council over the last year and a half, 2 years. So we'll take a brief look at the goals, objectives, and strategy similar to Jonathan's presentation. We'll overview what those land use categories are that are proposed in Aspire, along with just a quick glimpse at the 2040 guide plan map, where those changes are throughout the city, and then development, redevelopment areas, and then also briefly touching on the MUSA, or the Metropolitan Urban Service Area boundary, that area that's served by sanitary sewer and water. So they're taking a really simplistic view of the goals. There are 3 goals that are outlined in the draft plan. There may be some more to be added with regard to sustainability, because we're really working to integrate that throughout the entire document. First and foremost is to continue to develop the city in accordance with the comp plan, setting that expectation for community members as well as the development community remains that overarching goal, so that people can make an investment and understand what they're getting in the long term. Secondly, focusing on creating a more dynamic mix of land uses throughout Eden Prairie, so prioritizing those areas where redevelopment is likely to occur, whether that's in the major center area, the Golden Triangle area, or TOD areas for that multiple land use types and how they will interact with one another. And then lastly is a quick conversation about the city's history. There has a vibrant history in Eden Prairie. I think it is something that a lot of people don't necessarily think of history when they think of Eden Prairie. They think of other locations, but the city has done a lot of work to keep and maintain those historic properties, as well as keeping an eye on what are the new historic properties that are emerging. Because as time goes on, there will be more historic properties as history changes over time. And if you have questions, feel free to interject at any time. So just a quick look at what's new from the 2008 comprehensive plan. So there are some new land use categories that have been modified to respect existing development, but also reflect evolving development patterns and trends. And we'll talk about those in a little more detail in future slides. But we've also proposed a revised density ranges for residential development in the community, as well as taking a harder look at infill development, whether that is commercial infill development, like some of the development proposals the commission has seen lately, for instance, the Starbucks in Jerry's Foods parking lot, or the new Culver's over at Prairie View. As well as residential infill sites. You know, most of the community is developed, but there are handfuls of 2 to 5 to 7 acre sites, maybe even a couple 10, 20 acre sites in town where there is development opportunity. And with us getting toward the end of that development range, taking a really hard look at what should go there rather than maybe just expecting the status quo, and what are the city's needs long term. And then what's different from the 2008 plan is also providing some parcel-specific visions. So there, in the land use chapter, you'll find whether it's a property called out by name or address, and specifically stating this is the vision for that property. For instance, there's a paragraph that talks about the Winter Park property, and redevelopment is likely to occur on that, of course, in the coming years. And what does the city want to see there? The plan calls for a hotel with meeting space as that being an opportunity site for that. But there are also, as we get into some of the land use categories, specific language or vision for properties in different land use categories as well. So the residential land use categories that are proposed have the same names as what you have in the 2008 plan. What has changed is the density ranges. So for instance, the low density residential is proposed to allow up to 5 units per acre. Right now it allows up to 2.5 units per acre. Medium density, it proposes to allow up to 14. Currently that is 10. And then the medium high density, it proposes 14 to 40. Right now that's 10 to 40 units per acre. The high density is the one that remains static under what's currently allowed in code. So those are the solely residential categories. Then when we move into the other land use categories, we've got a whole list of them here. Those that are shown in green are new. Now, I use the term new loosely because it might be a new term, but get to a development pattern that already exists. So for instance, the mixed use development is a new category. There are a limited number of parcels that are guided mixed use in the land use plan, specifically Eden Prairie Center, because we'll talk about it a little bit more as retail evolves and synergies that can be provided along with those retail areas, taking a look at what is the best long-term plan. Another site is the Presbyterian Homes Fountain Place area, because mixed use can not only mean vertically integrated but horizontally integrated. And I think I'm actually stealing my own thunder because I think I've got a better slide about that later. The TOD development section is language that's already in code. It's being provided with a little more specificity, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. Regional commercial is an existing designation. The commercial designation is highlighted in green as new because right now the 2008 plan breaks that down into community commercial and neighborhood commercial. And really there's such minor differences between the purposes of those and building sizes and things like that, that it made more sense to apply a more general commercial designation and then let the specifics of the zoning ordinance language kind of vet out which is the appropriate zoning district. The office remains the same. Industrial, flex tech, flex service, and industrial, I think, are the next ones we really want to talk about. Right now in the 2008 plan, you'll just find the category industrial, and that would cover anything from the majority of the properties in the GTA to the asphalt plant up on Crosstown. And they're really two very distinct uses, or 3 or 4 different distinct uses. So we've tried to break that up a little bit. The industrial is intended to cover that heavy industrial use like you'll find in the Crosstown area over by Carlson Drive. The flex service is intended to get to what we talked about last time with the special area studies, the Martin Drive area and the Pioneer, where the city's really trying to guide uses that maybe don't coexist as well in the town center, TOD, and commercial areas, but there's a need for them in the community. So where should we place them? Those types of things. And the industrial flex tech really gets to those properties that are largely in the GTA. So those properties that are now zoned I-2, I-5, they were developed under a different industrial parameter than what industry is today. So providing a little more flexibility, whether it's more of a combination of office and research and development versus that more hardcore manufacturing that maybe was expected back when the GTA was developed. The eco-innovation is another new category, and at this point it is only proposed to apply to the land use, or the landfill site, the Flying Cloud landfill, as a spot where there is opportunity for whether it is passive or active recreation, alternative energy sources such as methane recapture or solar. Maybe it's a yard waste collection area, that type of thing. So the city will work with the MPCA, who owns the property, as to what that ultimate end land use plan is. But this eco-innovation designation, while it's only at this point proposed on the landfill site, that doesn't mean that it couldn't be applied for or requested on other properties that were logical for those types of uses. And then the remaining 4 are holdovers, carryovers from the 2008 plan of airport, public, semi-public, park and open space, and golf course. So no significant changes proposed in those areas. So I kind of, as I said, stole my own thunder. The mixed-use land category is largely two areas. One is the Eden Prairie Center, and then Fountain Place and Presbyterian home sites. So the 2 graphics that you see, the one on the right is the current approval for the Presbyterian home site, which provides for higher density residential, and then a mix of land uses of more retail along the front. So again, that mix can be either vertical, like we anticipate in Town Center and TOD, or horizontal throughout the site. And then with regard to Eden Prairie Center, just knowing that retail spaces are undergoing changes, the big box retail spaces that we've seen in the past are not what we expect to see in the future, and retail becoming more of a destination type of experience. What can we do to promote synergy amongst uses in order to really capitalize on those areas? So this is just intended to be a graphic of different uses that could work together. The Aspire comp plan draft does talk about, at Eden Prairie Center, a mix of uses being multifamily residential, entertainment, office, medical office, those types, maybe a hotel, those types of uses over in that area, to really figure out what does that want to be as things continue to evolve. And then the transit-oriented development, while that language exists in the comp plan today as a part of a recent comp plan amendment, staff really strove to provide a little more detail on some of these areas within the city. So providing for the distinct feel and flavor of each of the station areas, because the town center station area is much different from the Crosstown, I'm thinking, it's late, I'm blanking on the name. The one up by UHG, as well as the GTA. They all kind of have their own unique flair, and taking into account that there are existing development approvals. As we talked about earlier, for instance, in the GTA area, there was a lot of concern by property owners when the TOD ordinance went through about well, if we get rezoned to TOD, do we become nonconforming? And we've got recent approval. So there's language built into the comp plan that talks about certain parcels that might be guided TOD. For instance, take the Liberty Plaza site, guided TOD, but there's language that says if it develops consistent with its approval from 2007, 2008, that it would not trigger the need to rezone to TOD. But if they scrape that plan and start it over, or we're going to modify that plan somewhat, then we'd need to take a look at rezoning that to TOD and having that development more closely comply with the TOD principles that are outlined in the plan. And that type of triggering language is incorporated within all of the station areas that take into account some of those recent approvals and investments that have been made within the community. Now, there was discussion back when the TOD ordinance was adopted that the intention was to apply the town center zoning at the town center station, because as we talked about earlier tonight, that does have a little bit of a unique feel. But if you'll remember the discussions about the sub-districts, TOD has a sub-district that kind of gets to that light industrial business park type of use where town center does not. So when you take a look at the proposed land use map, you'll see that within the town center area, there are a couple of parcels that are guided TODE, because that more closely aligns with what their current development pattern and expected development pattern is long-term. So there is that little bit of a nuance within the plan. And then just a quick snapshot within the plan, you'll see the land use plan for 2040. So all of those properties are guided for one of those land use categories. There's also a map that identifies those parcels where there's been a land use change. Now that change may simply be just a change in the densities allowed, as we talked about earlier with the residential, or it may be a completely new name and category, like moving from public to eco-innovation. So, but this graphic is intended to help the reader understand, as well as just general community members understand where those changes are at within the plan. Another requirement by the Met Council as part of the comp plan update is to identify those development areas. So this map on the edge of your screen does identify where the city really expects to see a lot of its development and redevelopment. As you can see, just looking at even the small scale, you can see a lot of it is located along the LRT line, but there are also those infill type of properties that we talked about earlier, and prioritizing those and understanding how development of those infill properties can really fit into the context and the environment of the development that is around it. And then lastly, over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the graphic of the city's southern boundary. That red line that goes through that graphic depicts where the metropolitan urban service area is, or the MUSA boundary. So on the east end of town, you can see it follows a pretty straight line along the river, but then on the west end of town, it's a little more circuitous. And that was handled through the late 1990s. There was an amendment in order to add, I think it was about 800 acres into the MUSA line. And to put a really simple conclusion on it, there was concern about protecting the natural environment, the steep slopes, the trees and things in that area. So that line actually follows a topographic line on a map. So it doesn't follow parcel boundaries, it does bisect boundaries. So there's discussion in the comp plan draft at this point that no changes are proposed to that MUSA boundary. But we understand that there may be some properties that are bisected, so in the future, property owners may come in and request expansion to the MUSA boundary based on their site-specific issues. Staff did at first kind of take a look at and go, should we try and address these, 30 to 40 parcels, but as we looked at them and saw each of them have their own unique issues, some of them have steep slopes, some of them have floodplains, some of those have trees, it really seems to make more sense to kind of take a look at them on a case-by-case basis and really understand the specifics of each property rather than provide more of an umbrella to address the MUSA. And that's the quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
That's good. Could you go back to the slide just on that topographic explanation you made there? Not to dig into the weeds too much, but is that contour line set based on gravity sewer, such that anything south of that line would need a lift station? Or was that more arbitrary than that?
I'll attempt to answer that. Most of it is based on gravity. That line was set when when Met Council put in the Red Rock Interceptor.
Yep.
Kind of through the western half of the southwest portion of the city.
Yep.
So that was kind of the boundary of the gravity line, but it also kind of coincided with that change in topography from the top of the hill to the slope going down toward the river.
That's what I was always my impression, is that there was as much a protection of the bluff, the slope down from the bluff as anything on that line.
Yep. In the very southwest corner of our city, on Flying Cloud Drive, where there's the auto salvage, is there like a small motel down there, if my memory serves me right, or?
Either
Is
or
there?
was.
Is or was?
Yeah.
Right, okay. Yeah, so they're not within the MUSA boundary, so that's all well and septic.
Well, the properties you're referring to are in Chanhassen.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
The Richard T. Anderson area is right on the boundary.
Okay, great. And I'm sorry, Julie, on the left-hand graphic, the land use change areas,
Yep.
specifically right, as you said, around the LRT, the upper right one, there's a red area that I can't read in this slide. Could
Right.
you maybe describe where that is? Is that along Shady Oak Road? Or, I can't quite tell.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, that parcel, I assume you're talking about the kind of red one?
Yes?
That is, I believe, at this scale, that is the Shady Oak Strip Center.
Yep.
That is over there. So it is guided TOD due to its proximity to the train station, as
Okay.
well as just taking a look at a variety of other factors, whether it is age of the structures, proximity, likely to redevelop, be reinvested in.
Okay, when this is published, or maybe there's preliminary data out already, are landowners contacted so that they're aware that their land value is being subjected to our interpretation of development change?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, with regard to notification for formal review of the comprehensive plan, the city will follow its legal obligations of, notice in the newspaper. We will also promote notice through our website, as well as there's been a specific Aspire webpage that's been created that folks can sign up for, and I think we've got like 600 subscriptions
Yep.
to that. So all of those folks would get a news blast going out to them saying, the public hearing is being scheduled for the comp plan. In addition, via City Connect and other social media, the city has been promoting each of these chapters, as well as the Aspire process overall. So will individual notices be sent to all of the property owners within the city of Eden Prairie? That's not anticipated because of the massive promotion that has gone on through other mechanisms. Because as you can see from the other, I'm going to go the wrong way, land use change, it's hard to tell on this map because many of the parcels are more of a kind of a creamy yellow in color that doesn't show up here, but almost every parcel has some kind of change, whether it's a name change, whether it's a density range change. So that would necessitate notice to almost every single property owner within the community.
Okay. Let me ask my question a different way. Since we do a comprehensive guide plan change
Yep.
periodically, and all cities do, is there a historical precedence for appraisers using these tools to reappraise properties once they're put into a different box of changes going to happen here? So therefore, the valuation of the property is changing. is there a correlation between our putting that property in this bucket of future change and appraised valuations?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, there may very well be a change in value. Now, whether or not that triggers a new appraisal on each and every one of those parcels, that I couldn't speak to. But there could be a change either way, depending on what the change in guiding is with regard to value of the property.
Sure, okay, all right. Okay. Commissioners, any questions about land use? Commissioner Villarreal.
I do. One of the things I was thinking about as I was reading through this is, well, first question is, where there's existing electric transmission lines, would this fall under the land use of requiring those areas to be, if they're not already subject to trails or other waterways like the one near my house is Coyote Creek, but would it fall under this to turn those areas into pollinators as opposed to just mowing the grass? Would that fall under the land use?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think that is likely a strategy or an action that is more of an implementation type of action associated with other initiatives rather than an overall
Okay.
policy plan.
All right. So then, thinking of the year 2040, some of these areas, especially around the commercial and industrial areas, are going to be likely optimal places for DC fast chargers for electric vehicles. And somewhere in here it talks about, I think in the TOD area, about having sufficient charging stations for electric vehicles. So one of the questions would be, would something like charging of electric vehicles be an appropriate use of an industrial site? Because in order to do DC fast charging, you have to have access to a certain type of electric infrastructure, which industrial customers likely have. So would that be categorized as a land use where you would allow that land to be used for fast charging?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think that again kind of gets to more of the zoning of what is the permitted use within that zoning district rather than kind of the higher level overview of what is the policy of land use on the guiding map. So, we've talked a lot this evening about sustainable initiatives, and the city does have several of those in process right now. Energy Action Plan, Sustainable Eden Prairie, and implementation that comes out of those I think you'll largely see reflected in those on-the-ground practices that kind of come up through these development reviews.
Sure. So the reason why I bring it up is because the PCA is having electric vehicle corridor discussions right now, where they're identifying areas across the state that are located very close to interstates or other highly trafficked roads as optimal locations to put DC fast chargers. And thinking of the land use planning that would need to go into ensuring there's sufficient infrastructure to support something like a fast charger, while I understand that's an implementation of the zone, it seems to me that it's also worthwhile to think about how is the land use planning being planned for to support the infrastructure needs for a fast charger. And then I'll add, because again, thinking of 2040, I suspect that Met Council will move to a substantial portion, if not all of the portion, to be electric buses. So a component of the land use planning would be not just where the bus routes are going, but where those buses are going to be charged, and ensuring that the routes are aligned with appropriate land use for where they can charge. So I understand the implementation question. I do think, though, that this is broader than just implementation of the land use. I think this has to be included in the land use designation.
All right. Last minute comments from anybody? Thank you, Julie, for your presentation on land use. We appreciate that. That finishes up the planner's report part of our agenda. Any members' reports tonight? I don't believe so. Continuing business? I don't believe we had any new business. I will be open to a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Kirk, seconded by Commissioner Villarreal for adjournment. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your patience this long evening.